On the night of October 5, 2022, a black Mercedes veered off a winding road outside Detroit, Michigan, crashing through a guardrail and tumbling down a steep embankment before coming to rest against a massive oak tree. The driver, 44-year-old Marcus Devereaux, a successful aerospace engineer and father of two, was pronounced dead at the scene, his body slumped over the steering wheel amid the twisted metal and shattered glass. First responders initially cataloged it as another tragic accident on a notoriously dangerous stretch of road leading to a cluster of luxury cabins where Detroit's elite escaped the city's constant hum. But something about the crash scene wouldn't sit right with Dr. Leora Devereaux, the victim's sister, and a senior pathologist at the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office who arrived after being notified of her brother's death. The skid marks didn't make sense, Dr. Leora would later testify, her voice steady despite the personal nature of the case as she stood before the jury in Wayne County Circuit Court. The investigation noted that the tire tracks showed no evidence of braking or swerving. Instead, the Mercedes had traveled in an unnervingly straight line off the road, as if deliberately aimed at the ravine below. Weather conditions had been clear that night, with a nearly full moon illuminating the autumn landscape and no precipitation to explain a sudden loss of control. Marcus Devereaux had made this drive countless times before, using the cabin as both a weekend retreat and occasional workspace when designing sensitive components for government aerospace contracts that required extra privacy. If you're watching this true crime documentary, make sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get back to the story. Detective Andrew Carter of the Detroit Police Department's Homicide Division was assigned as lead investigator, initially approaching the scene with the presumption of an accident, but quickly developing doubts. The victim's blood alcohol level was well below the legal limit, and a preliminary drug screening showed no evidence of substances that might impair driving ability or judgment. Carter, a 15-year veteran with salt and pepper hair, and the methodical patience of someone who'd seen patterns emerge from chaos hundreds of times before, noted in his initial report that the victim's position in the vehicle seemed staged rather than natural. Marcus's seatbelt had been fastened, but his body position suggested he might have been unconscious before impact, lacking the typical defensive posturing seen in accident victims who are aware of an impending crash. Dr. Leora Devereaux, unable to officially examine her own brother's body due to the obvious conflict of interest, nonetheless reviewed the autopsy findings with professional scrutiny and personal determination. The official cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma consistent with the high-impact collision, but Leora insisted on additional toxicology tests beyond the standard panel. My brother didn't drink to excess, didn't take medications that would make him drowsy, and was meticulous about vehicle maintenance, she explained to Carter during their third meeting in his cluttered office at police headquarters. Her persistence would prove crucial when the secondary tox screen, conducted at her insistence and expense, revealed traces of succinylcholine, a powerful muscle relaxant used primarily in surgical procedures to temporarily paralyze patients during intubation. Serafina Voss Devereaux, Marcus's wife of 15 years, maintained the perfect image of the devastated widow in the days following the crash. She coordinated the funeral arrangements with composed efficiency, dressed her children, 14-year-old Kaylin and 10-year-old Sienna, in appropriately somber attire, and accepted condolences with downcast eyes and a voice that cracked at just the right moments. Her performance at the memorial service held at Detroit's historic Cathedral of the Most Blessed Sacrament was flawless, from the trembling hands that accepted the folded American flag honoring Marcus's earlier service in the Air Force, to the poignant eulogy that emphasized his dedication as a father and innovation as an engineer. Only her mother, Vivian Voss, seemed to hover unusually close throughout the proceedings, whispering in her daughter's ear, between receiving lines and screening who could approach the grieving widow, behavior that several attendees would later describe as controlling and suspicious in hindsight. The Devereaux family home, a sprawling Tudor revival in Detroit's historic Boston Edison neighborhood, went on the market just 11 days after Marcus's death. The listing, handled by Serafina herself, a successful real estate agent specializing in Detroit's luxury market, described the property as a rare opportunity and emphasized its original leaded glass windows, quarter-sawn oak paneling, and meticulously restored period details. Neighbors found the speed of the listing distasteful, but not necessarily suspicious. Grief takes many forms, they reasoned, and perhaps Serafina couldn't bear to remain in a home filled with memories. What they didn't know was that Marcus had discovered his wife's systematic embezzlement from his company, Devereaux Aerospace Innovations, just weeks before his death. Detective Carter first met Serafina 3 weeks after the crash, not at police headquarters or her home, but at the open house she was hosting for the family residence. His approach was deliberately understated, no badge visible, no partner flanking him. As he moved through the elegant rooms with the distracted air of a potential buyer, noting how Serafina expertly highlighted the home's craftsman details while deflecting questions about why she was selling. "My husband's passing has left me with too much house and too many memories," she told the small gathering of interested parties, her voice catching on the practiced line. Carter observed how her eyes remained dry despite the emotional presentation, how her manicured hands never trembled when discussing price points, and how she checked her phone with unusual frequency throughout the afternoon. The detective's suspicions deepened as he observed Serafina's interaction with her children, who had been instructed to remain upstairs during the open house, but had ventured down for snacks. Kalen, the teenage son with his father's height and solemn demeanor, seemed to deliberately avoid his mother's gaze, while young Sienna clung to her brother rather than seeking comfort from Serafina. "Kids, please take those cookies back upstairs," Serafina had said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, adding in a whisper that carried just far enough for Carter to hear. "We discussed this. Mommy is working." The children retreated without argument, suggesting a household dynamic where obedience trumped emotional connection, a stark contrast to the loving family portrayal in Serafina's eulogy. As the open house wound down and prospective buyers filtered out into the crisp autumn afternoon, Carter lingered, pretending to admire the original tile work in the entryway, while actually watching Serafina's relief as she prepared to lock up. "Excuse me, Ms. Vos Devereaux," he finally said, producing his badge from an inner pocket of his jacket. "I'm Detective Andrew Carter with Detroit Homicide, and I have some follow-up questions about your husband's accident." The transformation in Serafina's expression was instantaneous and telling, a flash of naked fear quickly masked by confusion and then indignation. "I've already spoken with officers at the scene," she replied, her hand moving to her throat in what Carter recognized as a self-soothing gesture common among those hiding information. "And this is hardly appropriate timing, Detective. I'm working." Carter's partner, Detective Ramirez, who had been waiting outside, entered through the still-open front door with a document in hand. "Mrs. Devereaux, we have a warrant to search your electronic devices, including your phone, computer, and any cloud storage accounts," Ramirez stated calmly, extending the paper toward Serafina, whose complexion had gone from porcelain to ashen in seconds. "This isn't about your husband's accident anymore," Carter added, watching her closely for reaction. "This is about what caused it." The sound of Serafina's phone clattering to the marble floor as it slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers echoed through the empty house, a house that still held secrets within its historic walls, secrets that were about to be excavated with the same methodical precision as Dr. Leora Devereaux's toxicology investigation. The Boston Edison neighborhood sat in eerie silence as Detective Carter and his partner secured the scene at the Devereaux residence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Detroit's most prestigious historic district. Other officers arrived discreetly in unmarked vehicles, establishing a perimeter, while digital forensic specialists began the painstaking process of collecting and documenting Serafina's electronic devices. "I don't understand what you're looking for," Serafina protested, her voice regaining its composure as she sat rigidly on an antique settee in her own living room, now transformed into an active crime scene. Her eyes tracked every movement of the officers cataloging items throughout the house, particularly focusing on the specialist who had taken possession of her dropped phone, now sealed in an evidence bag after photographs documented exactly where it had fallen. Detective Carter observed how Serafina's right hand repeatedly reached for her absent phone, a modern reflex revealing her anxiety about what they might find there. "Mrs. Devereaux, we have reason to believe your husband's death wasn't accidental," he stated flatly, watching her reaction with the calculated neutrality that had broken countless suspects in his interrogation room. Though her facial expression remained controlled, Carter noted the physiological tells she couldn't suppress: the subtle dilation of her pupils, the quickening pulse visible at her throat, the slight moisture gathering at her hairline despite the room's comfortable temperature. "That's absurd," she finally responded, but the millisecond delay between his statement and her denial told Carter everything he needed to know about the truthfulness of her response. As officers continued their methodical search, Serafina's mother, Vivian Voss, arrived, having been called by her daughter in the brief moment before her phone was confiscated. "What is the meaning of this invasion?" demanded the elegant silver-haired woman who entered without knocking, her designer handbag clutched like a shield as she surveyed the officers moving through her daughter's home. Detective Ramirez intercepted Vivian, explaining the warrant while Carter continued his casual but pointed conversation with Serafina, asking seemingly innocuous questions about her husband's work schedule, their financial arrangements, and her real estate business. The careful choreography of the two detectives, one handling the protective mother, the other probing the increasingly uncomfortable suspect, reflected their years of partnership and shared understanding that family dynamics often revealed crucial information during initial contact with suspects. From the second floor came the sound of children's voices as Kaylin and Sienna emerged from their respective rooms, drawn by the unusual activity below. "Mom, what's happening?" asked Kaylin, his lanky teenage frame pausing at the top of the staircase, one protective arm extended to hold his sister back. Carter watched as something almost imperceptible passed between mother and son, not the expected reassurance from parent to child, but rather a warning glance from Serafina that caused the boy to stiffen. "Everything's fine, kids," Serafina called up with forced lightness, her voice carrying a brittle edge that belied her words. "Grandma Vivian is here. Why don't you two go with her for ice cream while I finish up some business with these gentlemen?" Vivian moved quickly to usher the children out, but Detective Ramirez smoothly intervened. "I'm afraid we need everyone to remain on the premises for the time being, Mrs. Voss," he stated with professional courtesy that nonetheless made clear it wasn't a request. The tension in the room ratcheted higher as Vivian's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly, revealing a flash of something harder beneath her socialite exterior. "On what grounds are you detaining my grandchildren?" she demanded, unconsciously positioning herself between the officers and the staircase where the children still stood, watching with wide eyes. Carter noted the protective gesture, but also the calculating look that passed between mother and daughter, a silent communication that suggested shared secrets rather than shared confusion. As the search continued, Carter received a text from the digital forensics specialist who had begun preliminary examination of Serafina's laptop in a mobile unit parked outside. Mrs. Devereaux, can you explain why you searched undetectable poisons and car accidents that look natural in the weeks before your husband's death? Carter asked conversationally, as if inquiring about her choice of drapes. The reaction was immediate. Serafina's composure faltered visibly as she glanced toward her mother with naked panic, before recovering with a forced laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm a real estate agent, detective. I research all sorts of things for my mystery book club," she replied, the explanation tumbling out too quickly to be convincing. "We were reading an Agatha Christie novel last month, and then there were none, I believe, all about different murder methods." Detective Ramirez was simultaneously reviewing information on his tablet, strategically positioning himself so Vivian could see that he was scrolling through financial records. "That's interesting," he commented, looking up to address Serafina directly, "because we've found several large transfers from Devereaux Aerospace accounts to your personal account over the past 18 months, totaling approximately $180,000. The color drained from Serafina's face as her carefully constructed narrative began to crumble around her. "Those were authorized transfers," she insisted, her voice rising slightly as she added, "Marcus handled all our finances. You can check with his accountant." Both detectives noted that Vivian's reaction to this revelation was not surprise, but resignation, the look of someone who already knew about the embezzlement but had hoped it wouldn't be discovered. The children remained on the staircase, Kalen's expression hardening as he overheard the financial accusation while Sienna pressed her face against the banister rails, watching with the solemn attention of a child who had grown accustomed to adult tensions. "Perhaps the children could wait in another room with an officer," Carter suggested, suddenly aware that the investigation was about to take a direction that would shatter whatever remaining illusions they might have about their mother. Serafina seized this suggestion with visible relief, nodding quickly and calling up to her children, "Kalen, take your sister to the media room and put on a movie. Loud, please." The instruction to play something at high volume didn't escape Carter's notice, a mother attempting to shield her children not from the officer's questions, but from her own answers. Once the children were settled in the home's soundproofed media room under the watchful eye of a female officer instructed to ensure they remained there, the tenor of the investigation shifted. "Mrs. Devereaux, we've obtained records indicating that your husband had scheduled a forensic audit of his company's accounts for October 10th, Carter stated, watching as Serafina's last hopes of maintaining her innocence visibly collapsed. He had also consulted with divorce attorney Gerald Mackenzie on September 28th, just 1 week before his death. The timing was damning. Marcus had discovered the embezzlement, planned to document it officially, and initiated divorce proceedings, all within days of his accidental death. Serafina's right hand moved to her throat again in that unconscious self-soothing gesture as she looked to her mother for guidance or perhaps rescue. Vivian stepped forward, suddenly assuming control of the situation with the confident authority of someone accustomed to managing crises. "My daughter won't be answering any further questions without her attorney present," she announced, reaching into her handbag for her phone. "I'm calling Bradford Winters. He'll meet us at the station." The invocation of one of Detroit's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, known for representing the city's elite in everything from white-collar crime to domestic disputes, was telling. Carter exchanged a glance with Ramirez, both recognizing that Winters was not someone retained on the spot, but likely already on retainer, suggesting Vivian had anticipated legal troubles for her daughter even before today's confrontation. As Vivian made her call, stepping into the kitchen for privacy, Carter noticed Serafina's gaze drift toward a framed family photograph on the mantel, Marcus and Serafina, flanking their children, all smiles against the backdrop of Lake Michigan. "When was that taken?" he asked, following her line of sight to the seemingly happy family portrait. Serafina's answer came with a hollow emptiness that revealed more than she intended. "Last summer, before everything Changed. The simple statement hung in the air between them, pregnant with unspoken meaning. What changed, Mrs. Devereaux? Carter pressed gently, employing the softer approach that often yielded more than direct confrontation. Serafina's eyes remained fixed on the photograph as she whispered, almost to herself rather than to the detective, Thaddeus needed help, and Marcus wouldn't listen. The mention of Thaddeus, Serafina's younger brother, provided the first explicit connection to a motive that the detectives had been piecing together from financial records. "Thaddeus Voss, your brother, has a gambling problem, doesn't he?" Ramirez asked, returning from checking on the children to rejoin the conversation. Serafina's head snapped up, her momentary vulnerability replaced by defensive anger, as she realized she'd revealed too much. "My brother had some financial difficulties, like many people during the pandemic," she replied stiffly, the euphemism falling flat in the face of their investigation. Carter made a note to prioritize interviewing Thaddeus Voss as soon as possible, suspecting that the embezzled funds had been funneled directly to cover gambling debts, creating a chain of financial desperation that ultimately led to murder. Vivian returned from the kitchen, her composure fully restored and her socialite mask firmly back in place. "Bradford will meet us at the station in 1 hour," she announced, her tone suggesting she was managing a minor inconvenience rather than a potential murder investigation. "He advises that we cooperate fully with the warrant, but that Serafina exercise her right to remain silent from this point forward." The calculated shift in strategy, from denial to legal maneuvering, confirmed Carter's suspicion that Vivian was more than just a concerned mother. She was actively involved in managing the aftermath of whatever her daughter had done. As Carter prepared to inform Serafina that she would be transported to headquarters for formal questioning, his phone buzzed with a text from the forensic team examining the victim's recovered laptop. Found deleted emails. MD knew about embezzlement since Sept 15. Had evidence. Also found life insurance policy change dated Oct 3. Beneficiary changed from wife to mother. The Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office hummed with the quiet efficiency of scientific investigation, its stark fluorescent lighting and antiseptic scent, creating an atmosphere where death was studied rather than mourned. Dr. Marissa Chen, the forensic pathologist who had conducted Marcus Devereaux's autopsy, stood before a light board displaying toxicology results while Detective Carter and Dr. Leora Devereaux, present in her professional capacity despite her personal connection to the case, listened intently. The secondary tox screen detected succinylcholine in the victim's system at levels consistent with intentional administration rather than environmental contamination, Dr. Chens explained, pointing to specific markers on the complex chemical analysis. The discovery was significant, not only for confirming foul play but also for the specific choice of substance. Succinylcholine was a medication primarily used in hospital settings as a short-acting muscle relaxant during intubation procedures, making it unlikely to be found in someone's system outside of medical treatment. Dr. Leora Devereaux maintained her professional demeanor with visible effort as she examined her brother's toxicology results, her hands steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. Succinylcholine paralyzes the respiratory muscles quickly, typically within 30 to 60 seconds, but leaves consciousness intact, she explained to Carter, the clinical precision of her words belied by the tightness in her voice. The implication was horrific. Marcus would have been aware as his body betrayed him, unable to control his vehicle as it veered off the road, conscious but helpless during his final moments. The drug metabolizes rapidly in the body, she continued, which is why it wasn't detected in the standard tox panel. Only specialized testing would reveal it, and even then, only if performed within a specific window after death. Detective Carter processed this information with the methodical focus that had become his trademark in homicide investigations, connecting this new evidence to the digital trail they'd been assembling. So, whoever administered this knew enough about forensic toxicology to choose a substance that would likely go undetected, he observed, his gaze shifting between the two medical professionals. Dr. Chen nodded in agreement, adding, "It requires knowledge beyond what an average person would have, either medical training or significant research, and it would need to be administered shortly before death to achieve the paralysis effect while driving." This timeline was consistent with what they knew of Marcus's movements on the night of his death. He had stopped for coffee at a gas station approximately 20 minutes before the estimated time of the crash, creating a window of opportunity for someone to intercept him. Back at police headquarters, Detective Ramirez was following the financial angle, having obtained emergency subpoenas for the Venmo transaction records connected to Serafina's accounts based on the preliminary evidence from her devices. "We've identified a payment of $5,000 made from Serafina Vos Devereaux's personal Venmo account to a recipient identified only as DM Landscaping on September 30th, 5 days before Marcus's death," he reported to Carter over the phone. The transaction description read simply, "yard cleanup." But the timing and amount raised immediate red flags, especially since the Devereaux property had a contracted landscaping service through a well-established Detroit company, and fall cleanups had already been completed the previous week according to their maintenance schedule. The Detroit Police Department's digital forensics lab had been working around the clock to recover deleted data from Serafina's devices, focusing particularly on communications in the weeks leading up to Marcus's death. "We've found fragmented text messages in the backup cache of her iPhone that reference a meeting at Highland Cemetery on September 25th, reported technician Zoe Wilson, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she pulled up the partially recovered exchange on the main screen. The messages were between Serafina and her mother Vivienne, with Vivienne writing, "He'll be at Aunt Marion's service tomorrow. Perfect chance to discuss your problem without raising suspicion." Serafina's reply had been mostly deleted, but the recovered fragment read, "Can't believe you know someone who handles these," with the rest of the message unrecoverable. Across town, in the interview room at police headquarters, Serafina Vos Devereaux sat with her attorney, Bradford Winters, a silver-haired man whose bespoke suit and patrician bearing conveyed authority and discretion. "My client maintains that her husband's death was a tragic accident," Winters stated for the third time, his tone suggesting boredom with the proceedings despite the seriousness of the implied accusations. Serafina sat beside him with perfect posture, her expression carefully neutral, and her responses limited to yes or no on her attorney's advice. The interrogation had been underway for nearly an hour, with little progress, Winters effectively blocking any substantive questioning by repeatedly citing his client's Fifth Amendment rights and suggesting that the police were engaging in a fishing expedition without concrete evidence. The dynamic in the interview room shifted dramatically when Detective Carter entered, carrying a file folder that he placed deliberately on the table without opening it. "Mrs. Devereaux, we've obtained records of a $5,000 Venmo payment you made to DM Landscaping on September 30th, he stated without preamble, watching her face for reaction. Despite Winter's hand on her arm, warning her to remain silent, Serafina's composure cracked slightly. A widening of the eyes, a quick intake of breath, before she regained control. "We're also aware of your meeting with an individual at your great-aunt's funeral on September 25th, arranged by your mother specifically to help with your problem," Carter continued, the strategic vagueness of his statement designed to suggest they knew more than they actually did, potentially prompting Serafina to fill in the gaps herself. Winters interceded smoothly, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man accustomed to controlling difficult situations. "Detective, if you have actual charges to file against my client, I suggest you do so now. Otherwise, this interview is concluded." The attorney began gathering his papers in a calculated show of dismissal but paused when Carter opened the folder and removed a photograph, placing it face up on the table where both Winters and Serafina could see it. The image showed a man in his early 30s with close-cropped dark hair and a distinctive tattoo visible on his forearm, captured by a security camera at the gas station where Marcus had stopped on the night of his death, the timestamp placing him there just minutes after Marcus had left. "Do you recognize this man, Mrs. Devereaux?" Carter asked, watching as Serafina's carefully maintained facade began to crumble at the edges. The recognition in her eyes was unmistakable, though she quickly looked away from the photograph and toward her attorney for guidance. "Again, my client has nothing to say," Winters insisted, but his voice carried less certainty than before as he studied the image with growing concern. Carter pressed his advantage, adding, "His name is Dante Marlowe, and until recently he worked as a pharmacy technician at Detroit Metropolitan Hospital with access to medications including succinylcholine." The mention of the specific drug that had been found in Marcus's system caused Serafina's composure to falter completely, her face draining of color as she gripped the edge of the table for support. Back at the forensics lab, Technician Wilson made a breakthrough discovery that would fundamentally change the trajectory of the investigation. "I've recovered deleted browser history from the victim's laptop showing he accessed his life insurance policy portal on October 3rd, just 2 days before his death," she reported to Detective Ramirez, who had returned to oversee the digital investigation while Carter conducted the interview. The browser history showed that Marcus had logged into the website of Prudential Life Insurance at 11:42 p.m., spending approximately 17 minutes on the beneficiary change form page before receiving a confirmation email at 12:01 a.m. He changed his primary beneficiary from Serafina to his mother, Eloise Devereaux, Wilson explained, pulling up the confirmation email that had been automatically archived in Marcus's Gmail account. This discovery added a crucial dimension to the case. If Serafina had orchestrated her husband's murder partly for financial gain, she would have been unaware that Marcus had already nullified that motive by changing his beneficiary. "Check if Serafina accessed Marcus's email or the insurance portal after his death," Ramirez instructed, suspecting that the discovery of this change might have triggered additional panic or actions. Wilson's fingers flew across the keyboard as she traced IP addresses and login timestamps, confirming there was an attempt to access his email account from Serafina's laptop on October 6th, the day after his death, but the attempt failed. He had changed his password recently. The digital breadcrumbs were painting a picture of a man who had discovered his wife's betrayal and taken methodical steps to protect himself and his assets, steps that tragically proved insufficient against physical threat. The investigation took another significant turn when the forensics team processing Dante Marlowe's apartment discovered a SIM card backup device hidden in a hollowed-out book on his shelf. These devices store text message content and call logs as a backup. They're typically used legitimately to transfer data to a new phone, but they can also serve as insurance in case someone wants to delete incriminating messages, explained Technician Wilson to the assembled investigation team. The timing of this discovery was critical. While Dante Marlowe had not yet been located for questioning, the search of his residence had been authorized based on the gas station security footage and his connection to both the hospital, where succinylcholine was available, and to the suspicious Venmo payment from Serafina. When the contents of the SIM card backup were downloaded and analyzed, the case against Serafina solidified dramatically. "We've recovered a series of text exchanges between Dante Marlowe and Serafina, dating from September 25th to October 5th, reported Wilson, displaying the messages on the main screen in the forensics lab. The exchanges began with cautious language regarding that special project we discussed at the service, but quickly became explicit. "Need it done before the 10th? Make it look like an accident? I'll pay $5K now, $5K after. Don't text me again." Marlowe's responses showed initial hesitation, followed by negotiation. This kind of landscape work is risky. Need $7,000 upfront. The most damning message came from Serafina on the day of the murder. He's leaving for the cabin at 7, dark road, no cameras, perfect. As this evidence was being compiled, Detective Carter continued his interview with Serafina, who had requested a brief consultation with her attorney in private following the revelation about Dante Marlowe. When they resumed, Winter's strategy had visibly shifted from outright denial to damage control. "My client wishes to cooperate with your investigation regarding Mr. Marlowe," the attorney stated carefully, "but maintains that any interaction with him was related to legitimate real estate matters." Serafina nodded in agreement, having regained some composure during the break, though her hands remained clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "Dante Marlowe was a client of mine last year. I helped him find a condo in Midtown," she explained, the practiced ease of her real estate persona returning as she crafted a narrative to explain their connection. Carter listened to this explanation without interruption, his expression revealing nothing as he allowed Serafina to establish her version of events. "And the Venmo payment labeled yard cleanup?" he finally asked when she had finished. Serafina's response came too quickly, the explanation clearly prepared during her consultation with Winters. "He's been doing odd jobs since losing his hospital position. He offered to help with some landscape work at a property I'm listing where the owners are out of state." The deliberate vagueness of this answer, no specific address provided, no details about what work was performed, highlighted its fabricated nature. "That's interesting," Carter replied, leaning forward slightly, "because we've just obtained Mr. Marlowe's phone records, which show he was at the gas station on County Line Road at 6:45 p.m. on October 5th, just minutes after your husband stopped there on his way to the cabin." The interview room fell silent as the implication of this statement hung in the air, Serafina's carefully constructed narrative beginning to unravel thread by thread. That must be a coincidence," she stammered, looking to Winters for support. But finding the attorney's expression had hardened as he reassessed the situation based on this new information. Carter pressed his advantage, adding, "We also know that succinylcholine was found in your husband's system, a drug Mr. Marlowe had access to at the hospital before his termination." He paused, allowing this connection to sink in before delivering the final blow. "And most importantly, we've recovered text messages between you and Mr. Marlowe explicitly discussing making your husband's death look like an accident on that specific road." With this revelation, Serafina's composure shattered completely, her face crumpling as the full weight of the evidence against her became clear. "That's impossible. Those texts were deleted," she whispered, then immediately realized her critical mistake. Winters closed his eyes briefly, recognizing that his client had just implicitly admitted to sending incriminating messages, and moved quickly to damage control, announcing, "This interview is over, Detective. My client is exercising her right to remain silent." But the damage was done. Serafina's inadvertent confirmation that she had sent texts to Marlowe about making her husband's death look like an accident, combined with the physical evidence of succinylcholine in Marcus's system and the financial trail of the Venmo payment, provided more than enough probable cause for an arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. The interrogation room at Detroit Police Headquarters felt increasingly claustrophobic as Detective Andrew Carter methodically arranged a series of evidence photographs on the metal table, separating him from Serafina Voss Devereaux. "Let's start from the beginning," he suggested, his tone conversational despite the gravity of the situation unfolding between them. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across Serafina's once perfect makeup, now smudged from hours of questioning and intermittent tears that seemed to appear on cue whenever direct questions were asked. Bradford Winters, her attorney, sat beside her with the rigid posture of a man recalculating his strategy with each new piece of evidence presented. His earlier confidence noticeably diminished as the case against his client continued to strengthen. "I've told you everything I know about Dante," Serafina insisted, her voice carrying the practiced indignation of someone accustomed to having her version of events accepted without question. She gestured dismissively at the photograph of Marlowe captured by the gas station security camera, adding, "If he was following Marcus that night, it was his own initiative. I never asked him to harm my husband." The deliberate phrasing, not a categorical denial of knowing Marlowe's intentions, but rather a specific denial of explicitly requesting harm, reflected Winters' coaching during their brief consultation break, attempting to create distance between Serafina and the actual murder while explaining away any incriminating communications as misunderstandings. Carter nodded thoughtfully, maintaining his unhurried demeanor as he slid another document across the table, a printout of the Venmo transaction. $5,000 is a lot for yard cleanup, Mrs. Devereaux, he observed, watching her reaction closely as he deliberately used her married name rather than her professional, hyphenated version. The subtle reminder of her connection to the victim caused a barely perceptible flinch, quickly masked as she launched into an explanation about premium landscaping services and property preparation for high-end listings. Her words flowed with the polished ease of a real estate professional accustomed to justifying luxury price points, but Carter noted how her right index finger tapped nervously against her thigh beneath the table, a tell she couldn't control, even as she maintained eye contact and steady speech. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically when Carter removed a final document from his folder, a printed transcript of text messages recovered from Dante Marlowe's SIM card backup device. "Before we continue with your explanation of the landscaping payment, I'd like you to look at these messages sent between your phone and Dante Marlowe's in the week before your husband's death," he said, sliding the paper across the table with deliberate slowness. The color drained from Serafina's face as her eyes darted across the page, recognizing her own words that she had believed were permanently deleted. "Make it look like an accident. I'll pay $5K now, $5K after. Don't text me again." Beside her, Winters placed a restraining hand on her arm, sensing his client was about to speak impulsively, but the attorney's own expression betrayed concern as he scanned the damning evidence. "These messages have been taken completely out of context," Serafina finally declared, after a tense silence, her voice higher and faster than her previous measured responses. She launched into an elaborate explanation about a difficult property listing with accident damage that needed to be concealed from potential buyers, a narrative that grew more convoluted with each sentence as she attempted to retrofit an innocent meaning onto the explicit language captured in the texts. Carter listened without interruption, allowing her to entangle herself further in contradictions as she explained that he's leaving for the cabin at 7, dark road, no cameras, perfect, referred to a property inspection scheduled when lighting conditions would highlight certain features to a potential buyer named Cameron, not her husband, heading to their family cabin. When Serafina finally ran out of explanations, Carter leaned forward slightly, his expression remaining neutral as he delivered the fatal blow to her hastily constructed narrative. "Mrs. Devereaux, we've also recovered your search history from the weeks preceding your husband's death," he stated, watching as her last hopes of maintaining innocence visibly collapsed. The search queries told their own story. Undetectable poisons. How long does life insurance take to pay out? Car accidents that look natural. Muscle relaxant's fatal dose. And finally, succinylcholine detection autopsy. Each search had been conducted in private browsing mode, but the digital forensics team had recovered them from cached data in her laptop's hard drive, evidence that directly connected Serafina to both the method and motive of her husband's murder. In the observation room adjacent to the interrogation, Detective Ramirez stood watching the interview alongside Assistant District Attorney Emma Evans, both studying Serafina's deteriorating composure through the one-way glass. "We've located Dante Marlowe," Ramirez informed Evans in a low voice, careful not to disturb the audio recording of the ongoing interrogation. The hitman had been apprehended attempting to cross into Canada at the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel, carrying over $4,000 in cash and a prepaid phone containing only one contact, saved simply as S. Evans nodded, making notes on her legal pad as she assessed the strengthening case. "Has he made any statements?" she asked, her focus still primarily on Serafina's increasingly frantic body language visible through the glass. "That's where it gets interesting," Ramirez replied, handing Evans a preliminary report from Marlowe's initial processing. "He's claiming he never intended to kill Marcus Devereaux, just to take Serafina's money and disappear." According to Marlowe's statement, he had indeed followed Marcus to the gas station and then to a secluded stretch of road, but only to stage a minor accident where he would pretend to be injured, hoping to extort more money from Serafina by threatening to reveal their communications if she didn't pay. He admits to confronting Marcus on the road, but claims Marcus had some kind of medical episode during their interaction, clutching his chest and losing control of the vehicle before Marlowe could even make his demands. This account partially aligned with the forensic evidence of succinylcholine in Marcus's system, but raised critical questions about how the drug was administered, if not by Marlowe, during the roadside confrontation. Back in the interrogation room, Serafina's defenses were crumbling under the weight of the accumulated evidence, her carefully maintained facade giving way to increasingly desperate justifications. "You don't understand what Marcus was going to do to me," she said, her voice breaking as she leaned forward intently, addressing Carter directly rather than consulting with her attorney before speaking. Winters attempted to intervene, placing a hand on her arm and murmuring, "Serafina, I advise you not to continue this line of—" But she shook off his restraint, continuing with increasing urgency. "He was going to take everything, the children, the house, my reputation, all because of a misunderstanding about some business accounts." Carter recognized the critical moment when a suspect transitions from denial to justification, often the point where true motives are revealed. "What misunderstanding, Mrs. Devereaux?" he asked quietly, maintaining the careful eye contact that had established their connection. Serafina hesitated, glancing at her attorney who was now sitting back in his chair with the resigned expression of a man watching his defense strategy disintegrate in real time. "Marcus discovered some transfers from the company accounts," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "But it wasn't stealing. I was going to put it all back once Thaddeus sorted out his situation." The mention of her brother Thaddeus Voss confirmed what the financial investigation had already suggested, that the embezzled funds had been used to cover gambling debts. "Your brother has a gambling problem, doesn't he?" Carter prompted gently, maintaining the conversational tone that had successfully kept Serafina talking despite her attorney's clear discomfort. Serafina nodded, tears welling in her eyes that seemed genuine for the first time during the interrogation. "He got involved with some dangerous people. They were threatening his life if he didn't pay," she explained, the words tumbling out with increasing speed as if unburdening herself of a long-carried weight. "I only took the money as a temporary loan to keep him safe. Marcus never would have understood." As Serafina continued her explanation, the full picture of events leading to Marcus Devereaux's murder began to emerge. She described discovering that Marcus had found evidence of the embezzlement, approximately $180,000 transferred over 18 months through a series of small transactions designed to avoid triggering automatic alerts. "He confronted me on September 15th, she admitted, confirming the timeline established by the digital forensics team's recovery of deleted emails. He was so cold about it, said he'd already consulted a divorce attorney and was scheduling a forensic audit of all the company accounts. Her voice hardened as she recalled his stance, resentment, briefly overriding her performance of emotional distress. 15 years of marriage, and he was ready to throw it all away over money. Money I only took because my brother's life was in danger. The most damning revelation came when Serafina described learning about the scheduled audit planned for October 10th, just 5 days after Marcus's death. "When I heard the date of the audit, I knew I was out of time," she said, her gaze fixed on some middle distance as she recounted her thought process. "The auditors would document everything. There would be criminal charges. I'd lose custody of Kaylin and Sienna." She broke off abruptly, suddenly aware of how her words were incriminating her, despite her attempt to frame the situation sympathetically. Winters finally intervened decisively, announcing, "This interview is concluded, Detective. My client needs rest and consultation before any further questioning." As the interview paused for Winters' demanded consultation, Carter received an update from the team investigating Vivian Voss's connections to Dante Marlowe. Security footage from Highland Cemetery on September 25th, the date of the funeral service for Serafina's great-aunt Marion, showed Vivian introducing Serafina to Marlowe in a secluded area away from other mourners. Additional investigation had revealed that Marlowe had worked security at the hospital where Vivian served on the board of directors, creating the connection that ultimately led to the murder-for-hire arrangement. This evidence suggested Vivian's role extended beyond that of a supportive mother. She had actively facilitated the introduction that led to the conspiracy. When the interrogation resumed, Carter shifted his approach, focusing on the technical aspects of the crime rather than the emotional justification Serafina had been providing. "Mrs. Devereaux, we know that succinylcholine was found in your husband's system," he stated, watching her closely for reaction. "This is a controlled substance typically used in hospital settings, not something an average person would have access to." The implication was clear. Either Serafina had medical connections herself or had worked with someone who did to obtain the drug. Her response was immediate and defensive. "I've never even heard of that drug before today." But the digital evidence contradicted this claim directly. Her search history included specific queries about succinylcholine and its detection in autopsy procedures. "That's interesting," Carter replied, his tone making clear he didn't believe her denial. "Because Mr. Marlowe worked as a pharmacy technician until recently, with access to exactly this medication." He paused, allowing this connection to sink in before continuing. "And your mother, Vivian Voss, serves on the board of directors at the same hospital, which is how she knew Marlowe and arranged your introduction at your great-aunt's funeral." The color drained from Serafina's face as she realized the extent of the evidence connecting all the participants in the conspiracy. Her eyes darted to Winters, who was now reviewing the text message transcripts with growing concern, likely recognizing that the case against his client had moved beyond what clever legal maneuvering could overcome. The final phase of the interrogation focused on establishing the specifics of the murder plot, who had obtained the succinylcholine, how it had been administered to Marcus, and whether Marlowe had acted according to or against Serafina's instructions. "Dante claims he never intended to kill your husband," Carter informed her, watching closely for her reaction to this revelation. "He says he only planned to stage a minor accident and extort more money from you by threatening to reveal your arrangement if you didn't pay." Serafina's expression shifted from surprise to calculation to anger in rapid succession, clearly not having anticipated this betrayal from her co-conspirator. "That's a lie," she finally responded, her voice tight with controlled fury. "He took my money and promised to handle everything. I never wanted to know the details." This statement, intended to distance herself from the specifics of the murder, instead implicated her further in the conspiracy by acknowledging the arrangement with Marlowe. Winters winced visibly at this admission, but remained silent as Serafina continued. If Marcus had some kind of drug in his system, Dante must have given it to him during their accident. I certainly didn't have access to any medications like that. The attempt to shift blame entirely to Marlowe highlighted her desperation, as the digital evidence of her searches about succinylcholine directly contradicted this claim. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Carter informed Serafina that she was being charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and would be held without bail pending arraignment. We'll also be charging your mother, Vivian Voss, as an accessory to the crime based on her role in facilitating your connection with Marlowe and her subsequent attempts to conceal evidence, he added, watching as Serafina's remaining composure crumbled at the realization that her mother would also face serious criminal charges. The final blow came when Carter informed her that Marcus had changed his life insurance beneficiary from Serafina to his mother Eloise just 2 days before his death, meaning that even if the murder had gone undetected as planned, Serafina would not have received the $1.5 million policy payout that formed part of her financial motivation. The investigation into Marcus Devereaux's murder expanded beyond Serafina and Dante Marlowe, as detectives began to unravel the complex financial web that had ultimately led to the fatal conspiracy. In a sparsely furnished conference room at Detroit Police Headquarters, Detective Ramirez spread printouts of bank statements across a large table, tracing the flow of embezzled funds from Devereaux Aerospace Innovations to Serafina's personal accounts, and finally to various offshore gambling sites and cash withdrawals. Over 18 months, she systematically siphoned approximately $180,000 from the company using a series of transfers disguised as vendor payments and consulting fees, Ramirez explained to Assistant District Attorney Emma Evans, who was building the prosecution's case against both Serafina and her mother. The financial evidence was damning. Serafina had created false invoices from non-existent consultants, carefully keeping each transaction below $10,000 to avoid triggering automatic audit flags in the company's accounting software. Dr. Leora Devereaux, having recused herself from the official medical aspects of her brother's case, nonetheless provided crucial insights into Marcus's financial acumen and business practices as the investigation progressed. Marcus was meticulous about his company's finances. He reviewed every transaction personally at the end of each month, she explained during an interview in Carter's office, her composure maintained through obvious effort as she discussed her murdered brother. The obvious question hung in the air. How had Serafina managed to embezzle such a significant amount over an extended period without detection? Leora's expression hardened as she provided the painful answer. He trusted her completely. She managed their personal finances and had gradually taken on administrative responsibilities at the company over the past 2 years, especially as government contracts required more of Marcus's direct attention. The investigation into Thaddeus Voss, Serafina's brother, and the apparent beneficiary of the embezzled funds, revealed a troubled history of escalating gambling addiction and dangerous associations. Thaddeus accumulated debts exceeding $200,000 to organized crime figures connected to illegal gambling operations in Windsor, Canada, and Detroit, reported Detective Wilson, who had been assigned to track the money trail from Serafina's accounts. Bank records showed regular cash withdrawals, followed by border crossings to Canada, where Thaddeus would make partial payments on his mounting debts at a nightclub known to be a front for an Eastern European crime organization. Text messages recovered from Serafina's phone showed increasingly desperate pleas from her brother, including one dated just 2 weeks before Marcus's murder that read, "They're giving me one last chance, $50K by the end of the month, or they make an example of me. Please, Sarah, I have nowhere else to turn." Forensic accountants assigned to review Devereaux Aerospace's records confirmed that Marcus had indeed discovered the embezzlement approximately 3 weeks before his death, though he had taken no immediate public action. We found a hidden folder on Marcus's laptop labeled Audit Private, containing spreadsheets where he had meticulously documented every unauthorized transfer dating back to April 2021, explained Jamal Washington, the lead forensic accountant. The folder included screenshots of the falsified invoices alongside evidence of the actual destinations of the funds, as well as a document titled Audit Questions Doc, containing a list of specific transactions Marcus planned to highlight during the forensic audit scheduled for October 10th, 5 days after his murder. The final modification to this document had been made on September 15th, the same day Serafina had admitted Marcus confronted her about the missing funds. The depth of Marcus's preparation for both the audit and the likely criminal charges against his wife became increasingly apparent as investigators gained access to his legal communications. Marcus consulted with me on September 20th regarding divorce proceedings and potential criminal charges against Serafina, confirmed Gerald McKenzie, a prominent Detroit divorce attorney, during his official statement. McKenzie provided documentation showing that Marcus had been gathering evidence methodically while simultaneously making arrangements to protect his children and assets. He was particularly concerned about custody of their children, Kaylin and Sienna, given the likelihood that Serafina would face felony charges for the embezzlement, McKenzie explained, producing notes from their consultation where Marcus had expressed his determination to shield the children from public fallout while ensuring they understood the situation in age-appropriate terms. The investigation took a particularly disturbing turn when detectives discovered that Serafina had been researching undetectable poisons and methods for staging accidents weeks before approaching Dante Marlowe through her mother's connection. Her laptop contained searches dating back to August 30th for terms including untraceable poisons, medications that cause heart attacks, and deaths that look like accidents, reported digital forensics specialist Zoe Wilson, who had been analyzing the recovered data from Serafina's devices. This timeline suggested that Serafina had been contemplating murder even before Marcus confronted her about the embezzlement, perhaps anticipating that his regular financial reviews would eventually uncover her theft, as the amounts grew larger and more frequent to cover Thaddeus's escalating debts. Vivian Voss's role in the conspiracy expanded beyond merely introducing her daughter to Dante Marlowe, as additional evidence emerged. We've recovered text messages between Vivian and Serafina discussing the problem that needed solving, with explicit references to Marcus as an obstacle that needed to be permanently removed from the equation, Carter explained during a case briefing with the prosecution team. Surveillance footage from Detroit Metropolitan Hospital showed Vivian using her board member access card to enter restricted pharmacy areas on September 26th, the day after introducing Serafina to Marlowe at the funeral, timing that suggested she may have been instrumental in obtaining the succinylcholine used in the murder. Perhaps most damning was evidence that Vivian had deleted text messages from Serafina's phone while her daughter was in initial police custody, using Serafina's facial recognition to unlock the device when she was briefly left alone with her daughter's personal effects. The investigation into how the succinylcholine was actually administered to Marcus on the night of his death led to a critical breakthrough when detectives revisited the gas station where he had made his final stop. We've identified a coffee cup purchased by Marcus Devereaux at 6:38 p.m. on October 5th, reported Detective Ramirez, displaying enhanced security footage showing Marcus at the counter purchasing coffee and a protein bar approximately 20 minutes before his estimated time of death. Additional footage showed Dante Marlowe entering the gas station convenience store just 1 minute after Marcus exited, then leaving quickly without making a purchase. We believe Marlowe followed Marcus from the family home, waited for him to stop for coffee, as was his routine on drives to the cabin, then somehow introduced the succinylcholine into the coffee either in the gas station parking lot or at a point further along the route. Interviews with Dante Marlowe now cooperating with investigators in hopes of a reduced sentence, provided crucial details about the events leading up to Marcus's death. "I never intended to kill him," Marlowe insisted during his third interview, his initial bravado replaced by visible anxiety as he realized the severity of the charges he faced. "The plan was to stage a minor accident. I would claim he hit my car, threaten to call police, then recognize him as Serafina's husband, and use that to extort more money." According to Marlowe's statement, he had followed Marcus from the gas station, planning to force a minor collision on a secluded stretch of road, but found the opportunity to tamper with Marcus's coffee when he briefly left his vehicle unlocked while disposing of trash at a roadside bin, a detail that investigators later confirmed through location data from Marcus's phone, showing a 2-minute stop approximately 5 miles after the gas station. The forensic reconstruction of the murder painted a chilling picture of Marcus's final moments. Based on Marlowe's statement and the toxicology findings, we believe the succinylcholine was introduced into Marcus's coffee while he was stopped at the roadside trash receptacle, explained Dr. Chen during the case review. The drug would have taken effect within approximately 1 to 2 minutes after ingestion, just enough time for Marcus to return to his vehicle and proceed a short distance before experiencing the paralysis effects. This timeline matched the accident reconstruction, which showed no braking or attempt to correct course as the Mercedes left the road, consistent with a driver who had lost muscular control but remained conscious. The most disturbing aspect of this scenario was that Marcus would have been aware throughout the experience, unable to control his vehicle as it veered off the road but fully conscious as it tumbled down the embankment. The investigation into Marcus's life insurance policy change provided further insight into his state of mind in the days before his murder. Marcus contacted me on October 2nd requesting an urgent policy change to designate his mother, Eloise Devereaux, as the primary beneficiary in place of his wife, confirmed Patricia Okafor, the insurance agent who had handled the Devereaux family's policies for over a decade. The change had been processed and confirmed on October 3rd, just 2 days before Marcus's death, a timing that suggested he had recognized the potential danger of his situation, even if he hadn't anticipated the immediacy of the threat. He didn't explicitly state why he was making the change, but he was insistent it be processed immediately, Okafor recalled, noting that such urgency was unusual for the typically methodical Marcus. Eloise Devereaux, Marcus's 72-year-old mother, provided emotional testimony about her last conversation with her son just 1 day before his death. "He called me on October 4th, saying he needed to discuss something important about the children's future," she recalled, her voice steady despite the evident pain of the memory. According to Eloise, Marcus had explained that he was preparing to file for divorce and would be seeking full custody of Kaylin and Sienna due to serious concerns about Serafina's judgment and ethics. "He asked if I would help with the children while he sorted everything out legally, said he'd made some arrangements to ensure they would be provided for no matter what happened." The conversation had concluded with Marcus promising to visit her after his trip to the cabin to discuss specific arrangements, a visit that would never occur. As the investigation pieced together the full narrative of events leading to Marcus Devereaux's murder, the calculating nature of Serafina's planning became increasingly evident. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spontaneous reaction to being discovered, Assistant District Attorney Evans observed during the final case review before formal charges were filed. Serafina Voss Devereaux systematically embezzled from her husband's company over an extended period, began researching methods of murder when discovery became inevitable, enlisted her mother's help in finding someone to carry out the killing, timed the murder specifically to prevent the scheduled audit, and attempted to manipulate the investigation afterward. The premeditated nature of these actions, combined with the financial motivation and the particular cruelty of the chosen method, leaving Marcus conscious but helpless during his death, formed the basis for the prosecution's decision to charge Serafina with first-degree murder rather than accepting a plea to a lesser charge. The children, Kaylin and Sienna, had been placed in the temporary custody of their grandmother, Eloise, following Serafina's arrest, with trauma-informed counselors helping them process the devastating dual reality of their father's murder and their mother's role in orchestrating it. Kaylin had apparently suspected his mother's involvement from the beginning, reported Dr. Monica Shaw, the court-appointed child psychologist evaluating the children. He told me that his mother's behavior immediately after being informed of the accident struck him as rehearsed, a term that suggests remarkable insight for a 14-year-old. Sienna, at 10, struggled more with the abstract concept of her mother's betrayal, but had found some stability in her grandmother's care and the continued presence of her Aunt Leora, who had temporarily relocated to Eloise's home to help provide the children with family support during the legal proceedings. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office buzzed with focused energy as Assistant District Attorney Emma Evans assembled her team to build what was quickly becoming one of the most high-profile murder cases in recent Detroit history. We need to understand exactly who Dante Marlowe is and how he connects to both Serafina and Vivienne, Evans instructed, standing before a whiteboard covered with a timeline of events leading to Marcus Devereaux's death. The prosecution team had established the financial motive, documented the extensive planning, and secured the damning text messages. But fully understanding Marlowe's role was critical to countering any defense strategy that might attempt to shift primary blame to him as the actual administrator of the succinylcholine. We need to interview everyone who knew Marlowe at the hospital, establish exactly how he obtained the drug, and determine the full extent of his prior relationship with the Voss family, Evans continued, assigning specific investigative tasks to her assistant prosecutors. Across town, in the Oakland County Jail where he was being held pending trial, Dante Marlowe sat across from his court-appointed attorney, Michaela Rodriguez, who was reviewing the prosecution's evidence with increasing concern. They have the text, they have the Venmo payment, and they have you on camera following the victim on the night of his death, Rodriguez summarized, her expression grave as she assessed her client's difficult position. Marlowe, a 32-year-old former pharmacy technician whose professional life had unraveled due to prescription drug theft allegations 6 months earlier, slouched in his chair with the deflated posture of someone watching his limited options disappear one by one. "Look, I never meant for the guy to die," he insisted for perhaps the 20th time since his arrest, running his hands through his short dark hair in frustration. "I just needed the money." Serafina made it sound like an easy payday, just scare him a little, make it look like an accident happened. Detective Carter's interview with Marlowe's former supervisor at Detroit Metropolitan Hospital revealed crucial background that helped explain how a pharmacy technician had become entangled in a murder-for-hire plot. Dante worked here for nearly 4 years, and for most of that time, he was exemplary, punctual, detail-oriented, respected protocols, explained pharmacy director Dr. Patricia Nguyen, reviewing his personnel file in her office overlooking the hospital's central courtyard. The change had come approximately 9 months before Marcus's murder, when Marlowe had begun exhibiting signs of financial distress, requesting advance payments on his salary, picking up extra shifts, and eventually facing an internal investigation regarding missing fentanyl patches from the oncology department's medication inventory. We couldn't prove he was responsible for the thefts, but there were enough red flags that we had to terminate his employment, Dr. Nguyen continued, adding that Marlowe had become increasingly desperate during his final weeks at the hospital, at one point breaking down in tears in her office and explaining that he owed money to dangerous people. The connection between Marlowe and Vivian Voss proved more complex than initially suspected, emerging not from her hospital board position, as investigators had first theorized, but from a gambling establishment where both had been regular patrons. Dante Marlowe and Vivian Voss were both VIP members at the Royal Flush, an upscale gambling club operating on the edge of legality in Windsor, just across the Canadian border, reported Detective Ramirez, who had been following the money trail through both Marlowe's and Vivian's financial records. Surveillance footage from the club showed Vivian and Marlowe at adjacent poker tables on multiple occasions over the previous year, though they rarely interacted directly on camera. More telling were the club's internal records, obtained through cooperation with Canadian authorities, showing that Vivian had co-signed a marker, essentially a high-interest loan, for Marlowe 6 months before the murder, establishing both a financial connection and potential leverage over him. As investigators dug deeper into Marlowe's background, it became apparent that he had a history of confidence schemes and financial opportunism that long predated his involvement in Marcus's murder. Marlowe has never been convicted of a violent crime, but he has a pattern of exploiting people's desperation for financial gain, explained Detective Wilson, who had compiled a comprehensive background report. His criminal record included charges for check fraud, insurance scams, and a particularly relevant prior case involving an elderly client whom Marlowe had convinced to sign over property deeds while working as a home health aide, charges that were ultimately dropped when the victim passed away before trial. This history painted a picture not of a hardened killer, but of an opportunist who saw Serafina's murder proposition as another chance to profit from someone else's desperation. Most revealing was Marlowe's history as a client of Serafina's real estate business approximately 18 months before the murder, a connection that both had initially downplayed in their statements to police. Serafina helped Marlowe purchase a foreclosed condominium in Detroit's Midtown neighborhood in April 2021, confirmed Detective Ramirez, displaying property records on the investigation room's main screen. The timing coincided with the beginning of Serafina's embezzlement from Marcus's company, suggesting a potential link between the real estate transaction and the start of her financial crimes. Further investigation revealed that Marlowe had somehow qualified for the mortgage despite his precarious financial situation, with Serafina serving as both his real estate agent and mortgage broker, an arrangement that raised immediate red flags about potential document falsification to secure the loan. In a critical breakthrough, digital forensics specialists recovered deleted emails between Serafina and Marlowe, dating back to their initial real estate transaction, revealing a relationship that extended far beyond a standard agent-client interaction. "I can get creative with the income verification if you need flexibility on the loan application," Serafina had written in one particularly damning email from April 2021, adding, "My husband never reviews these files. We can make this work for both of us." Subsequent messages showed Serafina had indeed falsified Marlowe's income documents to secure his mortgage, creating potential legal exposure that she later leveraged when approaching him about another opportunity where discretion would be mutually beneficial, the thinly veiled reference to the murder plot that appeared in emails from September 2022. Marlowe's formal statement to prosecutors, provided as part of preliminary plea negotiations, detailed a version of events that partially absolved him of direct responsibility for Marcus's death, while still implicating Serafina as the mastermind. "She approached me after her great-aunt's funeral, pulled me aside, and said she needed a problem solved regarding her husband," Marlowe recounted, his affected nonchalance belied by the constant movement of his hands as he spoke. "At first I thought she wanted me to scare him, maybe rough him up a little, but then she started talking about accidents and life insurance." According to Marlowe, he had initially refused the proposal, but reconsidered after receiving threatening messages from a gambling debt collector ultimately agreeing to meet Serafina again to discuss details. The most significant aspect of Marlowe's testimony concerned his true intentions regarding the murder-for-hire scheme, a ICE version of events that investigators found partially credible based on his known history of confidence schemes rather than violence. "I never planned to actually kill the guy," Marlowe insisted, leaning forward intently during his videotaped deposition. "My plan was to take her money, make it look like I was going through with it, then disappear, maybe stage a minor confrontation with Marcus that I could photograph as proof I tried, but nothing that would actually harm him." This claim aligned with Marlowe's previous pattern of financial opportunism rather than violence, though it did little to mitigate his legal culpability in the conspiracy that ultimately resulted in Marcus's death. The crucial question remained. If Marlowe never intended to kill Marcus, how did succinylcholine end up in the victim's system? "I did take the drug from the hospital before I was fired," Marlowe admitted when directly questioned, his previous denials crumbling under the weight of evidence from the hospital's inventory records. "But that was months earlier. I took it along with other medications I was selling on the side." According to Marlowe's revised statement, he had given the succinylcholine to Serafina during their second meeting to discuss the murder plan, initially claiming it was something that would make it easier if he needed to subdue Marcus during their staged confrontation. She asked specific questions about how it worked, how quickly it acted, whether it could be detected, he recalled, adding that Serafina had insisted on taking possession of the drug herself as insurance that Marlowe would follow through on their arrangement. This revelation shifted the investigation's understanding of the murder mechanics, suggesting that Serafina herself might have administered the succinylcholine rather than Marlowe doing so during the roadside encounter as initially theorized. "We need to re-examine the timeline of Marcus's movements on the day of his death," Carter instructed the investigation team after reviewing Marlowe's new statement. Cell phone location data showed that Marcus had left the family home at approximately 6:15 p.m., stopped for coffee at the gas station at 6:38 p.m., briefly pulled over at a roadside trash receptacle at 6:47 p.m., and then proceeded toward the cabin before his car left the road at approximately 6:55 p.m. If Serafina administered the drug herself, it would most likely have been before Marcus left home, perhaps in a travel mug he took with him, Carter theorized, requesting a new search of the family home, focusing on travel mugs or other containers that might have been used to deliver the drug. A search warrant executed at the Devereaux residence led to the discovery of a travel mug in the kitchen dishwasher, which forensic testing revealed contained traces of succinylcholine residue. The mug was found in the dishwasher despite having completed its wash cycle, suggesting someone had intentionally left it there to ensure any residue would be destroyed, reported the forensic technician who had processed the scene. This evidence, combined with Marlowe's testimony about providing the drug to Serafina, created a new theory of the crime. Serafina had prepared a drink containing succinylcholine in Marcus's travel mug before he left for the cabin, calculating that the drug would take effect while he was driving along the dark, winding road where accidents were common and would not seem suspicious. Marlowe's role, then, had not been to administer the fatal drug, but to ensure that Marcus actually departed for the cabin as planned and to confirm the accident occurred, essentially serving as Serafina's eyes on the ground to verify her murder plan succeeded. "I followed him from the house like Serafina asked me to," Marlowe confirmed when presented with this theory. "She told me to watch him leave, make sure he was alone, and then text her when it was done. I assumed she meant after I confronted him, not after he crashed." Cell phone records confirmed a text from Marlowe to Serafina at 7:02 p.m. on the night of the murder, containing only the words, "It's done," sent approximately 7 minutes after Marcus's car left the road. The investigation's revised understanding of the murder mechanics painted an even more calculating picture of Serafina's role in her husband's death. She didn't just hire someone to kill Marcus, she actively participated in the murder by preparing the poisoned drink herself, Assistant District Attorney Evans noted during the case review, the implication clear. This level of direct involvement would make it virtually impossible for the defense to argue that Serafina had merely entertained abstract discussions about her husband's death without intending follow-through. The discovery that Serafina had administered the drug herself while sending Marlowe to monitor the results demonstrated a level of planning and separation of responsibilities that spoke to her determination to ensure Marcus died while maintaining plausible deniability. As the prosecution prepared its case against both Serafina and Marlowe, who had rejected a plea offer that required full testimony against Serafina in exchange for reduced charges, a parallel investigation into Vivian Voss's role continued to yield troubling results. We've confirmed that Vivian not only introduced Serafina to Marlowe and co-signed his gambling markers, but also made a cash withdrawal of $5,000 from her personal account on September 29th, one day before Serafina's Venmo payment to Marlowe, reported Detective Wilson. This suggested that Vivian may have provided the funds for the initial payment to Marlowe, further entangling her in the conspiracy. Most damning was security footage from the police station showing Vivian using Serafina's phone while alone in the waiting area during her daughter's initial questioning. Digital forensics later confirmed this was when critical text messages between Serafina and Marlowe had been deleted. The investigation into Thaddeus Voss, Serafina's brother, and the apparent beneficiary of her embezzlement scheme, resulted in his arrest on charges of fraud and money laundering related to the funds taken from Devereaux Aerospace. While we have no evidence that Thaddeus was aware of or involved in the murder plot, he was knowingly receiving embezzled funds and using them to pay illegal gambling debts, explained Detective Ramirez during Thaddeus's arraignment. Facing up to 5 years in prison on these charges, Thaddeus agreed to a plea deal requiring his testimony about his financial relationship with Serafina, particularly regarding her knowledge of his gambling debts to organized crime figures, testimony that would further establish her desperation to prevent Marcus from exposing the embezzlement through the scheduled audit. As the case against Serafina, Marlowe, and Vivian solidified, the human impact of their conspiracy extended far beyond the legal proceedings. Eloise Devereaux, now caring for her orphaned grandchildren while mourning her murdered son, provided a victim impact statement that would later be read at all 3 sentencing hearings. Marcus was not just brilliant in his field, he was a devoted father, a loving son, and a man of unwavering integrity, she wrote, the steady handwriting belying her 72 years and the immense grief she carried. His children ask for him every day, trying to understand why the mother they trusted participated in taking their father from them. The statement concluded with words that would resonate throughout the courtroom months later. No sentence can restore what was taken from us, but justice demands accountability, not just for the act itself, but for the calculated betrayal that preceded it. The morning of July 18, 2023, dawned hot and humid in Detroit, the summer sun beating down on the Frank Murphy Hall of Justice as a phalanx of news vans lined Gratiot Avenue, their satellite dishes extending skyward like modern technological totems. Inside courtroom 3B of the Wayne County Circuit Court, court officers performed final security sweeps before the 9:01 a.m. sentencing, hearing that had drawn national media attention and filled every available seat in the public gallery. The case of the people of Michigan versus Serafina Voss Devereaux had captivated public interest not only for its lurid details, embezzlement, betrayal, murder for hire, but for the dramatic text messages the prosecution had introduced during trial, messages that Judge Adrienne Holloway had announced she would read aloud during today's sentencing as a final reckoning before pronouncing judgment. Judge Holloway, a 59-year-old former prosecutor with a reputation for meticulous preparation and unflinching directness, had already reviewed the pre-sentencing report in her chambers, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she made final notations in the margins. "Sandra, please ensure the technical team has tested the courtroom display screens thoroughly," she instructed her judicial assistant, glancing up from the thick folder of documents. The courtroom had been specially equipped for this sentencing, with large display screens installed so that the text messages between Serafina and Dante Marlowe would be visible to everyone present, the victim's family, the media, and most importantly, Serafina herself, who would have to face her own words enlarged and illuminated before receiving her sentence. At precisely 8:45 a.m., Serafina Vos Devereaux was escorted into the courtroom through a side door reserved for defendants in custody, the orange jumpsuit of the Wayne County Jail having replaced her once immaculate designer clothing. The physical transformation after 9 months of incarceration was striking. Her previously highlighted blonde hair had grown out to reveal darker roots, her carefully maintained manicure was gone, and the confident posture of a successful real estate agent had given way to the slightly hunched bearing of someone attempting to make herself smaller in hostile surroundings. Bradford Winters, her defense attorney, rose to greet her with a brief handshake, his expression revealing little optimism about the day's proceedings following their client's conviction on all counts after a 3-week trial that had concluded in early June. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Emma Evans organized her notes at the prosecution table, occasionally glancing toward the victim's family seated in the front row of the gallery. Eloise Devereaux sat with dignified composure between her daughter, Dr. Leora Devereaux, and Detective Andrew Carter, who had become something of a family advocate throughout the investigation and trial. The absence of Marcus and Serafina's children, Kaylin and Sienna, was deliberate. Eloise and Leora had decided, on the advice of the children's therapists, that attending their mother's sentencing would be unnecessarily traumatic, particularly given the text messages that would be displayed. "They've read some of the texts in the news already," Leora had explained to Carter the previous evening. "They don't need to sit in a courtroom and watch their mother's face as the judge reads aloud how she plotted their father's death." At 9 a.m. precisely, the courtroom fell silent as the bailiff called out, "All rise! The Circuit Court for the County of Wayne Criminal Division is now in session, the Honorable Judge Adrienne Holloway presiding." Judge Holloway entered with measured steps, her black robes flowing around her athletic frame as she took her position behind the bench, nodding once to the assembled court before stating, "Be seated." The rustle of movement subsided quickly as the judge adjusted her microphone and surveyed the courtroom with the practiced gaze of someone who had presided over thousands of proceedings but understood the singular importance of this particular sentencing. "We are here this morning for sentencing in the matter of the People versus Serafina Vos Devereaux," she began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the hushed courtroom. "The defendant has been convicted by a jury of her peers on counts of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and embezzlement of funds exceeding $100,000. The procedural aspects of the sentencing began with Judge Holloway confirming that all parties had received and reviewed the pre-sentencing report prepared by the probation department. Bradford Winters rose to acknowledge receipt and to register several objections to the report's characterization of his client's role in the conspiracy, arguing that it overemphasized Serafina's agency while minimizing Dante Marlowe's active participation in the murder. "Your Honor, while the jury has rendered its verdict, we respectfully submit that Mrs. Devereaux Vos was unduly influenced by financial pressures related to her brother's situation, and that Mr. Marlowe took advantage of her vulnerability, Winters argued, his voice carrying the polished confidence of an attorney accustomed to representing Detroit's elite. Judge Holloway listened impassively, making occasional notes but offering no indication of how these arguments might influence her sentencing decision. When Winters concluded his objections, Assistant District Attorney Evans rose to address the court, her expression somber as she faced the judge. "Your Honor, the people strongly disagree with counsel's characterization of the defendant's role in this premeditated murder," she stated firmly. The evidence presented at trial, including the defendant's own text messages and Internet search history, demonstrated conclusively that Serafina Vos Devereaux was not a passive participant, but rather the architect of a calculated plan to murder her husband in order to prevent him from exposing her embezzlement and seeking divorce. Evans paused, allowing this characterization to settle before adding, "The people believe the pre-sentencing report accurately reflects the defendant's culpability and the heinous nature of her betrayal of her husband, her children, and indeed, the sanctity of human life itself." Following these initial statements, Judge Holloway turned her attention to the central component of the day's proceedings, the reading of the text messages that had formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Before hearing impact statements and pronouncing sentence, I believe it is important for this court and all present to be reminded of the defendant's own words regarding the conspiracy to murder Marcus Devereaux, she stated, reaching for her reading glasses. A court technician dimmed the light slightly as the first display screen illuminated, showing a text message exchange dated September 27, 2022, between Serafina and Dante Marlowe. The messages appeared in a standard message format, with blue bubbles representing Serafina's texts and gray representing Marlowe's responses, a chillingly familiar format that highlighted the casual medium used to plan a murder. Judge Holloway began reading the exchange aloud, her clear voice carrying through the courtroom as all eyes moved between the displayed messages and Serafina's face. September 27, 2022, 10:17 p.m., Serafina Vos Devereaux wrote, "Following up on our conversation at the service, the situation has become urgent. Need to discuss the project we talked about." The judge paused briefly before continuing. September 27, 2022, 10:43 p.m., Dante Marlowe responded, "Not sure I'm comfortable with what you're suggesting. Risky business." Each word seemed to hang in the air as the judge continued through the exchange, in which Serafina gradually became more explicit about her intentions, writing, "This needs to happen before October 10th. That's the deadline. I'm willing to pay $10K total for a guaranteed solution to my problem." As the messages progressed chronologically across the screens, the courtroom remained utterly silent except for Judge Holloway's voice and the occasional sound of a journalist's pen scratching across paper. The exchange from September 28th showed Serafina growing increasingly explicit. "To be clear, I need this to look like an accident. Marcus drives to the cabin every Wednesday evening. The road is dark, winding. Accidents happen there all the time." Marlowe's response displayed initial reluctance. "This is murder you're talking about. I'm not sure I'm that kind of guy." But Serafina's persistence was evident in her reply. "Think of it as solving a problem that benefits us both. You get paid well for one night's work. I get freedom from a situation that's about to destroy me." The most damning messages came from September 30th, displayed on the central screen in enlarged text that seemed to pulse with accusation in the dimmed courtroom. "Make it look like an accident. I'll pay 5 KOs now, 5 KO after. Don't text me again." Marlowe's response, time-stamped just 3 minutes later, read simply, "Send the money. I'll handle it." A subsequent screen showed the Venmo transaction completed that same evening, with the innocuous description, "Yard cleanup," belying its sinister purpose. As these financial records appeared on screen, a small sound escaped from where Eloise Devereaux sat, not quite a sob, but a sharp intake of breath that seemed to embody the horror of seeing her son's life reduced to a transaction. Judge Holloway continued methodically through the exchanges, her voice remaining steady, even as the content grew increasingly disturbing. The messages from October 5th, the day of the murder, were particularly chilling in their cold precision. At 5:23 p.m., Serafina had written, "He's leaving for the cabin at 7, dark road, no cameras, perfect." Marlowe's response came quickly. "I'll be in position. Once it's done, I'll text confirmation." And then the final message from Marlowe at 7:02 p.m., approximately 7 minutes after Marcus's car had left the road. "It's done." Serafina's response, sent at 7:04 p.m., consisted of just 2 words that seemed to reverberate through the silent courtroom. "Thank you." As the last of the messages disappeared from the screen and the lights returned to their normal brightness, Judge Holloway removed her reading glasses and surveyed the courtroom, her gaze eventually settling on Serafina. "The words I have just read are not allegations or interpretations. They are your own words, Mrs. Vos Devereaux, planning the death of your husband and the father of your children with the calculated precision of someone scheduling a business meeting." The judge's voice, which had remained neutral while reading the texts, now carried an unmistakable edge of controlled anger. "Before I pronounce sentence, this court will hear impact statements from those affected by your actions, beginning with Eloise Devereaux, the mother of the victim." Eloise Devereaux rose slowly from her seat, supported briefly by her daughter Leora, before making her way to the podium positioned to face both the judge and the defendant. At 72, Eloise carried herself with the dignity of someone determined to speak for her murdered son, her silver hair arranged in a simple twist, and her hands gripping a single sheet of paper that trembled slightly despite her composed expression. "Your Honor," she began, her voice surprisingly strong for a woman of her years and circumstances, "my son Marcus was brilliant, a gifted engineer, a loving father, and a man of integrity who believed in honest work and family above all else." She paused, taking a breath before continuing. "He trusted Serafina completely, bringing her into our family, supporting her career, making her the mother of his children. And she repaid that trust by poisoning him for money and sending him to die alone on a dark road." Eloise continued her statement with remarkable composure, describing Marcus's dedication to his children and the void his murder had created in their lives. "Kaylin and Sienna ask questions I cannot answer. How could their mother choose money over their father's life? How could she plan his death so coldly, knowing they would be left without him?" Her voice faltered only once when describing how Marcus had called her, the day before his murder, to discuss his concerns about protecting the children during the divorce he planned to initiate. "He told me, 'Mom, no matter what happens with Serafina, I need to make sure the kids understand this isn't about them.' He was thinking about their emotional well-being, even as their mother was planning his death." As Eloise concluded her statement and returned to her seat, Judge Holloway nodded in acknowledgement before calling on Dr. Leora Devereaux to deliver her impact statement. Unlike her mother, Leora approached the podium with visible anger, her professional demeanor as a pathologist temporarily set aside as she addressed the court as a bereaved sister. "My brother died consciously paralyzed, aware of what was happening, but unable to control his vehicle or call for help," she stated, her medical knowledge making this understanding of his final moments particularly poignant. "As a doctor, I understand exactly what succinylcholine does to the body. It paralyzes the muscles while leaving consciousness intact. Marcus knew he was dying, knew he would never see his children again, and could do nothing to save himself, a torment I cannot begin to fathom." Following the impact statements, Judge Holloway turned to Serafina, asking, "Mrs. Vos Devereaux, you have the right to address the court before sentencing. Do you wish to make a statement at this time? Bradford Winters leaned over to whisper in his client's ear, likely advising caution, given that any statement could potentially impact future appeal efforts, but Serafina nodded and rose unsteadily to her feet. "Your Honor," she began, her voice barely audible, before she cleared her throat and started again. "I want the court to know that I never intended for Marcus to die." This statement, directly contradicting the evidence presented during trial, caused a ripple of murmurs through the courtroom that the judge silenced with a single raised hand. "I was desperate because of my brother's situation," Serafina continued, her voice stronger now, but with a brittle quality that suggested emotional strain or perhaps carefully calculated performance. Marcus didn't understand the danger Thaddeus was in. He was going to cut him off completely, report the missing funds, and I just needed time to fix everything. Tears began to fall as she added, "I loved Marcus, and I love my children more than anything in this world. I never wanted them to grow up without their father." The statement continued for several minutes, weaving between apology and justification, concluding with a direct plea to Judge Holloway. "I ask for mercy, Your Honor, not for myself, but for my children who have already lost one parent and shouldn't have to lose another for what was a terrible mistake, not the cold-blooded murder it's been portrayed as." Judge Holloway listened to this statement without visible reaction, waiting until Serafina had seated herself before beginning to deliver her sentencing decision. "Mrs. Vos Devereaux, this court has considered the jury's verdict, the pre-sentencing report, the impact statements, and your own statement just now," she began, her tone measured but resolute. "I have also reviewed once again the evidence presented at trial, including your internet search history showing weeks of research into undetectable poisons and methods for staging accidents, your financial records documenting systematic embezzlement from your husband's company, and perhaps most tellingly, the text messages I read aloud today, messages that reveal not a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated, premeditated plan to murder your husband to prevent him from exposing your crimes and divorcing you." The judge continued, her voice growing firmer as she addressed specific aspects of the case. "This court finds particularly disturbing the method you chose for your husband's murder, a paralytic agent that left him conscious but helpless as his vehicle crashed, ensuring he would experience the terror of his impending death without the ability to save himself." She paused, allowing this horror to register before adding, "I also note that you orchestrated this murder specifically to prevent the forensic audit scheduled for October 10th, 2022, an audit that would have documented your embezzlement of approximately $180,000 from Devereaux Aerospace Innovations, funds that supported not legitimate family needs, but rather your brother's gambling addiction." Having addressed the circumstances of the crime, Judge Holloway turned to the matter of sentencing. "The Michigan Penal Code provides clear guidelines for the crimes of which you have been convicted," she stated, referring briefly to the documents before her. "For conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and for the murder itself, the law prescribes a mandatory minimum sentence of 25 years to life imprisonment, with judicial discretion regarding parole eligibility." She paused, her gaze steady, as she delivered her decision. "It is the judgment of this court that you, Serafina Vos Devereaux, be committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections for a term of 35 years to life imprisonment for the murder of Marcus Devereaux, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years of this sentence." A collective murmur passed through the courtroom at the severity of the sentence, 5 years beyond the mandatory minimum, with parole eligibility set at 30 years, rather than the minimum 25 years. Judge Holloway continued without acknowledging the reaction, adding, "For the embezzlement conviction, this court sentences you to a concurrent term of 15 years imprisonment." She then addressed the financial aspects of the case. You are further ordered to make restitution to Devereaux Aerospace Innovations in the amount of $180,000 plus interest to be paid from any future earnings or assets. The judge concluded the sentencing with a final observation that seemed to address not just Serafina, but everyone present. No sentence can restore Marcus Devereaux to his children or his family, but justice demands accountability proportional to the calculated cruelty of this crime, a crime motivated by financial self-interest and executed with a callousness that this court finds particularly reprehensible. As court officers moved to escort Serafina from the courtroom, the judge added one final comment that silenced the murmurs that had begun to rise following the announcement of the sentence. Mrs. Vos Devereaux, the texts I read today revealed your capacity for deception and calculation in service of your own interests, Judge Holloway stated, her voice carrying clearly across the now quiet courtroom. But perhaps the most telling message was the final one. Your simple thank you upon being informed that your husband's murder had been accomplished. The judge's expression remained impassive, but her words carried undeniable moral force as she concluded, that two-word response, sent just minutes after Marcus Devereaux's death, reveals more about your character than any statement you could offer this court today, and it is that character this sentence reflects. The sentencing hearing continued into its second hour as Judge Adrian Holloway systematically addressed the text messages between Serafina and Dante Marlowe, projecting each exchange onto the large courtroom screens with meticulous attention to chronological order and context. The court will now examine the messages from October 2, 2022, 3 days before Marcus Devereaux's murder, the judge announced, nodding to the court technician who brought up the next set of exchanges. Unlike the earlier messages that had established the conspiracy, these communications revealed the detailed planning phase of the murder, with Serafina providing specific information about Marcus's routine and vulnerabilities. He always takes the north route to the cabin, always stops at the Shell station on County Line Road for coffee, always drives the Mercedes, Serafina had written. The precision of her knowledge of her husband's habits, demonstrating the intimate betrayal inherent in her crime. Marlowe's responses showed increasing comfort with the murder plan as the financial incentive overcame his initial hesitation. I've driven the route twice now, found the perfect spot after that sharp curve where the guardrail is lower, he had texted on October 3rd, adding, if his car goes off there, it will look like he took the turn too fast. Happens all the time on that road. The courtroom remained utterly silent as these exchanges were displayed and read aloud, the clinical discussion of the logistics of Marcus's death contrasting starkly with the human reality of what those plans would mean. A father of two dying alone in a manufactured accident, his final moments spent paralyzed and aware as his vehicle plummeted down an embankment. From her seat at the defense table, Serafina kept her gaze fixed on her hands, refusing to look at either the screens displaying her words or the victim's family seated across the aisle. Judge Holloway paused the chronological review to highlight a particularly significant exchange from October 4th, the day before the murder. I need confirmation as soon as it's done, Serafina had written, with Marlowe responding, I'll text you immediately. What about the second payment? Serafina's reply revealed both her determination and her meticulous planning. I'll Venmo you within an hour of confirmation. Description will be final landscape installment. Delete these texts as soon as you read them. This exchange demonstrated not only Serafina's commitment to the murder plan, but also her awareness of creating a digital trail that could incriminate her, awareness that proved insufficient when investigators recovered the deleted messages from Marlowe's SIM card backup. The judge directed the court's attention to a specific message from Serafina, dated September 29th, which addressed the issue of Marcus's life insurance policy. The policy is $1.5 million paid directly to me as beneficiary. After I pay you, the rest solves all my problems, she had written to Marlowe, establishing financial gain as one component of her motivation. Judge Holloway's commentary on this message was particularly pointed. The court notes that the defendant was unaware that Marcus Devereaux had changed his life insurance beneficiary from his wife to his mother just 2 days before his death, a change that rendered this particular financial motivation futile, though the defendant did not know this at the time she orchestrated his murder. Perhaps the most damning messages were those exchanged on the morning of October 5th, just hours before the murder. Getting nervous, what if it doesn't work? What if they suspect? Serafina had texted, showing a momentary hesitation that Marlowe quickly addressed. You've created the perfect cover with the real estate open house tomorrow. Just act normal today, give him the coffee before he leaves, and let me handle the rest. This exchange was particularly significant as it directly referenced Serafina's role in administering the succinylcholine through Marcus's travel mug, evidence that had been corroborated by forensic testing finding traces of the drug in a mug recovered from the family dishwasher. Judge Holloway emphasized this point for the record. This message confirms what the physical evidence and Mr. Marlowe's testimony established, that the defendant personally administered the paralytic agent to her husband before he departed for the cabin. The sequence of messages on the screen shifted to show the final communications between Serafina and Marlowe on the evening of October 5th, beginning with her update at 6:25 p.m. He just left, drank the entire travel mug before driving. ETA to your position approximately 20 minutes. Marlowe's terse reply, in position, was followed by 37 minutes of silence before his message at 7:02 p.m. It's done? Judge Holloway's voice remained steady as she read these exchanges, but a subtle tightening of her expression conveyed her reaction to the clinical detachment with which Serafina had orchestrated her husband's final moments. In the gallery, Eloise Devereaux closed her eyes briefly, her hand finding her daughter Leora's for support as they endured this detailed accounting of their loved one's murder. Having completed the chronological review of the conspiracy as documented through text messages, Judge Holloway addressed a series of messages exchanged between Serafina and her mother, Vivian Voss, that had been recovered during the investigation. The court notes that these messages establish Vivian Voss's role as an accessory to the conspiracy, a matter that will be addressed in separate proceedings, the judge explained, before displaying the first exchange. On September 24, 2022, Vivian had texted her daughter, "I've found someone who might help with your Marcus problem. He works at the hospital, has access to certain things, and needs money badly. We'll introduce you at the service tomorrow." Serafina's reply, "Are you sure he can be trusted? This has to be absolutely untraceable," established that Vivian had been instrumental in connecting her daughter with Dante Marlowe, using her hospital board connections to identify someone with both access to medications and financial vulnerability. Further messages between mother and daughter in the days following the murder revealed Vivian's continued involvement in the conspiracy. "Delete everything from your phone immediately," she had instructed Serafina on October 6th, the day after Marcus's death. "Use the secure app I installed for any further communication with D." Another message from October 8th showed Vivian coaching her daughter on how to behave during the initial police investigation. "Remember to show appropriate grief, but don't overdo it. Mention his driving too fast on that road before. Establish pattern." Judge Holloway's commentary on these messages was particularly pointed. The court notes that these exchanges demonstrate not just Vivian Voss's knowledge of the conspiracy, but her active participation in both the planning phase and the subsequent attempt to conceal evidence, actions that constitute criminal accessory charges for which she will face separate proceedings. The judge then directed the court's attention to messages recovered from Serafina's phone that had been exchanged with her brother Thaddeus Voss in the weeks preceding the murder. "I need another $50,000 by the end of the month, or they're coming after me," Thaddeus had written on September 10, 2022. "You don't understand what these people are capable of. They've already threatened Mom if I don't pay." Serafina's response revealed her growing desperation. "I can't take any more from the company accounts, Thad. Marcus is starting to ask questions about the withdrawals. I need time to figure something out." This exchange established the financial pressure that had contributed to Serafina's motivation, showing how her brother's gambling debts had created the initial impetus for her embezzlement from her husband's company. A later message from Serafina to Thaddeus, dated September 16th, the day after Marcus had confronted her about the embezzlement, revealed her escalating panic. "He knows, Thad. He found the transfers. He's talking audit and divorce. If this goes public, we're both facing charges, and you'll have no protection from your friends." Thaddeus's reply had been less concerned with his sister's predicament than his own. "You have to fix this, Sarah. Find the money somewhere, anywhere. My deadline is October 15th, and these aren't people who give extensions." Judge Holloway noted for the record that while these exchanges established Thaddeus Voss's role as a beneficiary of the embezzled funds, investigators had found no evidence that he was aware of or involved in the murder conspiracy itself, a distinction that had resulted in his separate prosecution solely on fraud and money laundering charges. The court then examined messages exchanged between Serafina and Marcus in the weeks before his murder, messages that took on particular poignancy given the outcome. On September 15th, the day of their confrontation about the embezzlement, Marcus had texted, "We need to talk about the company accounts when I get home. Don't try to explain by text." Serafina's response had been casual, betraying nothing of her panic. "Of course, dinner at 7?" Later messages showed Marcus maintaining a civil tone despite his knowledge of her theft, focusing primarily on practical matters related to their children. "Can you take Kaylin to soccer tomorrow? I have a meeting with the accountant." His final text to his wife, sent at 6:22 p.m. on October 5th, just before leaving for the cabin, read simply, "Heading out now. Left the permission slip for Sienna's field trip on my desk. Don't forget to sign it by tomorrow." Judge Holloway paused after reading this final communication from Marcus, allowing its mundane content to underscore the tragedy of his murder. A father concerned about his daughter's field trip permission slip, even as his wife had poisoned his travel mug and set in motion the events that would end his life within the hour. The court notes that this message reveals Marcus Devereaux continuing to fulfill his parental responsibilities despite having discovered his wife's embezzlement and having already initiated divorce proceedings, a stark contrast to the defendant's choice to prioritize concealing her financial crimes over her children's need for their father. From her seat in the gallery, Dr. Leora Devereaux nodded almost imperceptibly, her brother's character accurately reflected in the judge's observation. Having completed the review of text messages, Judge Holloway addressed Serafina's internet search history in the weeks preceding the murder, displaying screenshots of queries that established her premeditation beyond any reasonable doubt. The defendant's search history shows a progression from financial desperation to murder planning, the judge noted, as the screens displayed searches from August through October 2022. Early searches focused on topics like hiding money from spouse, untraceable cash transfers, and avoiding bank reporting requirements, suggesting Serafina was initially seeking ways to conceal or continue her embezzlement. By early September, however, the searches had taken a darker turn: undetectable poisons, drugs that cause heart attacks, how to make death look accidental, Most damning were the searches specifically related to succinylcholine, beginning on September 26th, the day after Serafina met Marlowe at her great-aunt's funeral. Succinylcholine effects on body. How quick does succinylcholine work? Can succinylcholine be detected in autopsy? Succinylcholine in drinks stability. These queries demonstrated not only Serafina's knowledge of the specific drug used in Marcus's murder, but her active research into how to use it effectively while avoiding detection. Judge Holloway's commentary on these searches was unequivocal. These searches conclusively established that the defendant was not a passive participant in this murder, but rather actively researched the method, anticipated potential forensic detection issues, and planned the administration of the drug with full knowledge of its effects. The final category of digital evidence presented were emails recovered from Serafina's accounts, including communications with a divorce attorney she had consulted in August 2022, weeks before Marcus discovered the embezzlement. "I need to understand my financial exposure if I initiate divorce," she had written to attorney Jessica Nolan, adding, "particularly regarding business accounts I've had access to and withdrawals I've made from those accounts over the past year." This email, sent on August 17, 2022, suggested Serafina had been considering divorce herself, but was concerned about the financial implications of the embezzlement being discovered during divorce proceedings, a concern that took on new significance when Marcus discovered the theft independently and began his own divorce preparations. Emails between Serafina and a real estate colleague revealed her plans to quickly sell the family home following Marcus's death, with one message dated September 28th, stating, "Once this situation with Marcus resolves, I'll need to list the house immediately. Can you have the paperwork ready to go by October 10? The timing of this email, sent a week before the murder and specifying the same October 10th date that Marcus had scheduled for the forensic audit, further established Serafina's premeditation and her plans for the aftermath of her husband's death. Judge Holloway noted, "The defendant's email to her real estate colleague demonstrates that she was already planning the sale of the family home while her husband was still alive, with timing that aligned precisely with her murder plan and the deadline created by the scheduled audit." Having methodically presented all the digital evidence, Judge Holloway addressed the courtroom regarding its significance to her sentencing decision. "The evidence I have reviewed today, the text messages, search history, and emails, paints a clear picture not of a momentary lapse in judgment, but of a calculated, premeditated plan to murder Marcus Devereaux to prevent the exposure of financial crimes and to avoid the consequences of divorce." Her voice remained steady, but carried unmistakable moral authority as she continued. "The defendant had multiple opportunities to choose a different path, to confess to the embezzlement, to accept the consequences of her actions, to prioritize her children's need for their father over her desire to avoid accountability, and at each juncture she chose deception, escalation, and ultimately murder." The judge then directly addressed how this evidence had influenced her sentencing decision, particularly the decision to impose a term exceeding the mandatory minimum. In determining the appropriate sentence, this court has considered several aggravating factors established by the evidence presented, she explained. First, the premeditated nature of the crime, as demonstrated by weeks of planning documented in the defendant's communications and search history. Second, the method chosen, a paralytic agent that ensured the victim would be conscious but helpless during his final moments, an especially cruel death. Third, the motivation, not a crime of passion, but a calculated decision to eliminate Marcus Devereaux to prevent him from exposing the defendant's embezzlement and to avoid the financial and custodial consequences of divorce, Judge Holloway continued, addressing the final factor in her decision. Perhaps most significantly, This court has considered the profound breach of trust this crime represents, not just between husband and wife, but between mother and children. The defendant chose to deprive Kaylin and Sienna of their father rather than face the consequences of her own actions, a choice that reveals a disturbing prioritization of self-interest over the well-being of her children. This observation seemed to affect Serafina more than any previous statement, her composed facade finally cracking as she bowed her head, shoulders shaking slightly in what might have been genuine remorse, or simply recognition of how this characterization would affect her relationship with her children moving forward. As the judge prepared to conclude the examination of evidence, she addressed one final aspect of the case. Before proceeding to the formal pronouncement of sentence, the court wishes to acknowledge the role of Dr. Leora Devereaux, whose professional expertise and personal determination led to the discovery of succinylcholine in the victim's system, a critical finding that transformed what might otherwise have remained classified as an accident into the murder investigation that ultimately brought the defendant to justice. This recognition of Leora's contribution prompted a murmur of approval from the gallery, while Leora herself remained composed, acknowledging the judge's words with a slight nod, while maintaining her dignified bearing alongside her mother. The judge then addressed Eloise Devereaux directly. This court also acknowledges the tremendous burden that has fallen upon Eloise Devereaux, who at 72 years of age has taken on the responsibility of raising her grandchildren while navigating her own grief for her murdered son. Eloise straightened in her seat at this recognition, her expression revealing both the weight of her circumstances and the determination with which she had faced them. Judge Holloway continued, "The resilience shown by the Devereaux family throughout this ordeal speaks to the character and strength that Marcus clearly shared and passed on to his children, qualities that will serve Kaylin and Sienna well as they move forward with the loving guidance of their grandmother and aunt." With the evidence review complete, Judge Holloway removed her reading glasses and addressed Serafina directly, her expression grave but not unkind as she delivered what amounted to a final moral assessment before the formal pronouncement of sentence. "Mrs. Voss Devereaux, the evidence presented in this court has established beyond any doubt that you meticulously planned and executed the murder of your husband, a man who, by all accounts, was a devoted father, a successful professional, and someone who had welcomed you into his family and supported your career and ambitions for 15 years. The courtroom fell completely silent as the judge continued. "The texts and emails I have reviewed reveal not only your actions but the thinking behind them, a willingness to destroy a human life to avoid the consequences of your own choices, a calculation that your comfort and freedom were worth more than your husband's life and your children's need for their father." The judge paused, allowing these observations to register before delivering her final assessment. "It is the finding of this court that your actions reflect not a momentary failure of judgment, but a profound moral failure, a willingness to betray the most fundamental obligations of marriage, parenthood, and indeed, basic human decency." These words, delivered without anger, but with clear moral conviction, seemed to affect everyone in the courtroom, including Bradford Winters, whose usual poised demeanor momentarily gave way to a troubled frown as he contemplated the complete failure of his defense strategy in the face of such overwhelming evidence. Serafina herself remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the table before her, as the judge concluded her moral assessment and prepared to formally pronounce the sentence that would define the remainder of her life. The atmosphere in courtroom 3B grew even more charged as Judge Holloway prepared to address the series of revelations that had emerged during the trial, twists that had transformed an already compelling murder case into what many journalists were already calling one of the most Byzantine conspiracies in Michigan criminal history. The judge adjusted her reading glasses and referred to her notes before addressing the first significant revelation. Before pronouncing final sentence, this court will address three critical factual matters that emerged during trial, beginning with what the prosecution has termed Twist 1, the true intentions of co-conspirator Dante Marlowe. The courtroom leaned forward collectively, many spectators having followed the case closely enough to know that this particular revelation had fundamentally altered the understanding of the murder mechanics. Evidence presented during trial established that Dante Marlowe, contrary to his agreement with the defendant, never actually intended to murder Marcus Devereaux, Judge Holloway stated, her tone matter-of-fact, despite the dramatic nature of this revelation. Mr. Marlowe testified under oath that his plan was to take Serafina Vos Devereaux's money and disappear without carrying out the murder, a plan consistent with his prior history of confidence schemes rather than violence. The judge referenced specific testimony and evidence supporting this finding, including Marlowe's bank records showing a one-way ticket to Montreal, purchased for October 7, 2022, and a newly rented apartment in Quebec, secured under a false identity. The court finds Mr. Marlowe's testimony on this matter credible, particularly given the corroborating evidence and his willingness to admit to a conspiracy charge that carries substantial prison time, even while maintaining he never intended to complete the murder itself. This clarification highlighted the tragic irony at the heart of the case, that Marcus Devereaux's death had ultimately been caused by his wife's direct action in administering the succinylcholine rather than by the hitman she had hired. The evidence conclusively established that the defendant personally administered the paralytic agent to her husband's travel mug before he departed for the cabin, while Marlowe's role was limited to following Marcus to confirm the accident occurred as planned. Judge Holloway's voice carried a note of particular gravity as she added, "This means that had the defendant trusted her hired accomplice to carry out the murder rather than taking matters into her own hands, Marcus Devereaux might well be alive today, a tragic irony that underscores the defendant's direct responsibility for her husband's death." The judge then addressed the second major revelation of the trial, one that had elicited audible gasps in the courtroom when first presented by the prosecution. Regarding what the prosecution has termed Twist 2, the court acknowledges the evidence establishing that Marcus Devereaux had changed his life insurance beneficiary from his wife to his mother, Eloise Devereaux, on October 3, 2022, just 2 days before his murder. This change, documented through both insurance company records and the testimony of Marcus's insurance agent, Patricia Okafor, had effectively nullified one of Serafina's primary financial motivations for the murder. The $1.5 million policy that the defendant referenced in her communications with Dante Marlowe would never have been paid to her even if the murder had gone undetected as she planned, Judge Holloway explained, making the financial component of her motivation ultimately futile, though she was unaware of this fact when she carried out the murder. This revelation carried particular weight in the sentencing context, as Judge Holloway explained. While this change in beneficiary did not mitigate the defendant's culpability, as she believed she would receive the insurance proceeds at the time she committed the murder, it does provide significant insight into Marcus Devereaux's state of mind in the days before his death. The judge referenced Marcus's email to his attorney on October 3rd, in which he wrote, "I've changed the life insurance beneficiary to my mother, as we discussed. I don't trust that Serafina won't try something desperate when she realizes the audit will expose everything." This email, recovered during the investigation, revealed that Marcus had sensed the danger he was in, but had underestimated both its immediacy and the lengths to which his wife would go to prevent the scheduled audit. Judge Holloway then addressed the third significant revelation, which concerned the role of Serafina's mother in both the conspiracy and its aftermath. Regarding Twist 3, This court acknowledges the evidence establishing that Vivian Voss not only facilitated the introduction between her daughter and Dante Marlowe, but also actively participated in the attempted cover-up following Marcus Devereaux's murder. The evidence against Vivian had mounted throughout the investigation and trial, transforming her role from that of a potentially unwitting participant to an active accessory to both the murder conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Security footage from the police station where Serafina was initially questioned clearly shows Vivian Voss using her daughter's phone to delete text messages while alone in the waiting area, messages that were later recovered from Mr. Marlowe's SIM card backup and proved central to establishing the conspiracy. The extent of Vivian's involvement had been one of the most shocking aspects of the case for many observers, particularly given her standing in Detroit society as a hospital board member and prominent philanthropist. Additional evidence established that Vivian Voss was present at a meeting between Serafina and Dante Marlowe on September 29, 2022, where the final details of the murder plan were discussed, Judge Holloway continued, referencing security camera footage from a coffee shop near the hospital where Vivian served on the board. The court notes that Ms. Voss faces separate charges of accessory to first-degree murder and obstruction of justice, with a potential sentence of up to 25 years imprisonment, a matter that will be adjudicated in separate proceedings scheduled to begin next month. Having addressed these three significant revelations, Judge Holloway turned to the broader implications of the case, particularly regarding the effects on Marcus and Serafina's children. The court has reviewed reports from Dr. Monica Shaw, the court-appointed psychologist who has been working with Kaylin and Sienna Devereaux since their mother's arrest, the judge stated, her tone softening slightly when discussing the children. Dr. Shaw indicates that both children are showing remarkable resilience despite the trauma they have endured, largely due to the stable and loving environment provided by their grandmother, Eloise, and their aunt, Leora. The judge noted that Kaylin, at 14, had expressed a clear desire to have no contact with his mother for the foreseeable future, while Sienna, at 10, remained conflicted but was receiving appropriate therapeutic support to process her complex feelings. In one of the most poignant moments of the proceedings, Judge Holloway addressed a letter that Kaylin had written to the court which had been submitted as part of the pre-sentencing materials with the approval of his guardians and therapist. With the permission of his legal guardian, and in accordance with his expressed wishes, the court will now quote briefly from Kaylin Devereaux's letter regarding his mother's sentencing, the judge announced, lifting a single sheet of paper that bore the teenager's handwritten message. "I want the judge to know that my dad was the best person I've ever known," Judge Holloway read, her voice steady but not without compassion. "He taught me about integrity and keeping promises. He always said that actions have consequences, and that facing those consequences is what makes you a real adult. I think my mom should have the consequences she deserves for what she did to my dad, to our family, and to my sister and me." The simple eloquence of the teenager's words seemed to affect everyone in the courtroom, including several journalists who had been covering the case from the beginning. Judge Holloway continued reading, "I don't hate my mom, but I don't understand how she could choose money over our family, over my dad's life. Sienna still cries for both of them at night, for Dad because he's gone forever, and for Mom because the person we thought she was never really existed." The judge paused briefly before concluding the excerpt. "Whatever sentence you give her, it won't bring my dad back. But maybe it will help Sienna understand that what happened wasn't just a bad choice or a mistake. It was the worst thing one person can do to another." As Judge Holloway set the letter aside, Eloise Devereaux reached for Leora's hand, both women visibly moved by Kaylin's mature perspective on the tragedy that had shattered their family. The judge then addressed another aspect of the case that had emerged during trial, the specific role of Thaddeus Voss, Serafina's brother, whose gambling debts had initiated the chain of events leading to Marcus's murder. This court acknowledges that Thaddeus Voss has been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to fraud charges related to the embezzled funds, Judge Holloway noted. While the evidence does not suggest Mr. Voss was aware of or involved in the murder conspiracy, his repeated financial demands and his entanglement with organized crime figures created the desperation that Serafina Voss Devereaux ultimately used to justify her actions. The judge referenced text messages between the siblings in which Thaddeus had pressured his sister for increasingly large sums to cover gambling debts, including one message sent just 2 weeks before the murder that read, "If I don't pay them 50 kilos by the end of the month, they're coming after all of us. You, me, even Mom. This isn't a game anymore, Sarah." Judge Holloway also addressed the forensic evidence that had been central to transforming what might have remained classified as an accident into a murder investigation. This court acknowledges the critical importance of the toxicology findings that detected succinylcholine in Marcus Devereaux's system, findings that would not have been possible without Dr. Leora Devereaux's insistence on specialized testing beyond the standard protocol. The judge noted that this case had already led to procedural changes in the Wayne County Medical Examiner's Office, with new guidelines implemented for more comprehensive toxicology screening in cases initially classified as accidents but involving unusual circumstances. Marcus Devereaux's murder might well have gone undetected without his sister's professional knowledge and personal determination, Judge Holloway observed, a fact that underscores both the sophistication of this crime and the critical role of forensic science in ensuring justice. As the hearing moved toward its conclusion, Judge Holloway addressed the broader implications of the case for the Detroit community, particularly the children's ongoing needs. The court has established a trust for the educational and therapeutic needs of Kaylin and Sienna Devereaux, to be funded through the liquidation of assets from the defendant's separate property, including her real estate holdings and investment accounts. This arrangement, approved by all parties, including Serafina's defense team, would ensure that the children's material needs would be met through resources that had not been tainted by the embezzlement scheme. Additionally, the court has granted the petition filed by Eloise Devereaux for permanent legal guardianship of both children, with Dr. Leora Devereaux named as successor guardian should that become necessary in the future. Before delivering the final sentencing statement, Judge Holloway addressed a request from Marcus's colleagues at Devereaux Aerospace Innovations, who had established a scholarship fund in his memory to support engineering students at the University of Michigan, his alma mater. The court acknowledges the statement submitted by the employees of Devereaux Aerospace, who described Marcus Devereaux as a mentor of uncommon generosity and an innovator whose work in aerospace engineering advanced not just our company, but our field as a whole. The judge noted that the scholarship would ensure Marcus's legacy continued through future generations of engineers, a fitting tribute to a man described by all who knew him as dedicated to both innovation and education. In the final moments before pronouncing sentence, Judge Holloway addressed Serafina directly, her expression somber, but not without a measure of humanity despite the severity of the crime being addressed. Mrs. Voss Devereaux, this court has considered all aspects of this case, the premeditation evident in your planning, the callousness with which you orchestrated your husband's final moments, the devastating impact on your children, and the broader breach of trust this crime represents. The judge paused briefly, making eye contact with the defendant, who had maintained composed but seemed to physically shrink under this direct address. However, this court has also considered the contextual factors, including the financial pressures created by your brother's gambling debts, your lack of prior criminal history, and the testimony regarding your otherwise positive contributions as a mother before these events. This balanced consideration led to Judge Holloway's final pronouncement. Having weighed all these factors, and in accordance with the Michigan sentencing guidelines for first-degree murder, this court sentences you to 35 years to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. The sentence, 5 years beyond the mandatory minimum, with parole eligibility set 5 years later than required by law, reflected the judge's assessment of both the heinous nature of the crime and the mitigating factors she had acknowledged. This sentence reflects the gravity of taking a human life through calculated means, the particular betrayal inherent in murdering one's spouse and children's father, and the court's assessment that rehabilitation will require substantial time and intervention. As court officers moved forward to escort Serafina from the courtroom, following the pronouncement of sentence, Judge Holloway added a final observation that seemed directed not just at the defendant, but at everyone present. This case reminds us that true justice cannot simply be measured in years of incarceration, for no sentence can restore Marcus Devereaux to his children or heal the wounds this crime has created. She paused, her gaze moving briefly to where Eloise and Leora sat, with dignified composure, despite the emotional weight of the proceedings. What justice can provide is accountability, acknowledgement of the truth, and perhaps eventually a foundation upon which those left behind can build a future that honors what was lost, while refusing to be defined solely by that loss. With these words, Judge Holloway brought the formal sentencing hearing to a close, though the case would continue to resonate through separate proceedings against Vivian Voss and through the ongoing healing journey of the Devereaux family. As Serafina was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, her once immaculate appearance now replaced by the institutional orange jumpsuit and the weight of her sentence visible in her hunched shoulders, the judge's final words seemed to hang in the air, a reminder that while the legal proceedings might conclude, the human consequences of Serafina's actions would continue to unfold for decades to come, most significantly for the two children who had lost both parents in profoundly different ways on that October night in 2022. 9 days after Serafina Voss Devereaux's sentencing hearing concluded, Vivian Voss appeared before the same judge in courtroom 3B, her silver hair impeccably styled, and her designer outfit replaced by the standard-issue orange jumpsuit of the Wayne County Jail, where she had been held without bail since her arrest. At 68, Vivian maintained the regal bearing that had once made her a formidable presence in Detroit's social circles, but the strain of her circumstances showed in the tightness around her eyes and the slight tremor in her manicured hands as she conferred with her attorney, Cameron Blackwood, a distinguished criminal defense lawyer known for representing the city's elite. Unlike her daughter, who had maintained a facade of contrition throughout her trial, Vivian's expression conveyed an indignation that suggested she still did not fully accept the gravity of her role in Marcus Devereaux's murder. The State of Michigan versus Vivian Voss, case number CR 2023-78942, is now in session, announced the bailiff, as Judge Holloway took her seat at the bench, her expression revealing nothing of her assessment of this secondary but crucial participant in the murder conspiracy. The charges against Vivian were serious, but distinct from her daughters, accessory to first-degree murder and obstruction of justice, carrying potential sentences totaling up to 25 years. Ms. Voss, you have entered a plea of not guilty to both charges against you, Judge Holloway noted, reviewing the file before her. However, I understand from pre-hearing communications that there may be a change in that plea status today. Cameron Blackwood rose, adjusting his bespoke suit jacket with the unconscious gesture of someone accustomed to commanding attention in any room. "That is correct, Your Honor," he confirmed, his deep voice carrying the practiced cadence of decades in courtrooms. After extensive consultation with the prosecutor's office and careful consideration of the evidence, my client wishes to change her plea to guilty on both counts. Pursuant to the terms of the agreement we have reached, with Assistant District Attorney Evans. This announcement, while anticipated by those familiar with the case, nonetheless caused a ripple of murmurs through the gallery, where journalists and spectators had gathered for what many had expected to be a routine pre-trial hearing rather than a plea agreement. Judge Holloway addressed Vivian directly, her tone neutral but authoritative, as she ensured the defendant understood the implications of her plea change. Ms. Voss, before accepting your guilty plea, I must confirm that you are making this decision knowingly and voluntarily, with full understanding of the rights you are waiving and the potential consequences. Vivian nodded once, her posture stiffening as if bracing herself for what was to come. The judge continued with the standard colloquy, confirming that Vivian had not been coerced, was not under the influence of substances that might impair her judgment, and fully understood that her guilty plea waived her right to trial by jury and to appeal certain aspects of her case. When these preliminaries were complete, Assistant District Attorney Emma Evans rose to outline the terms of the plea agreement that had been reached after weeks of negotiation. Your Honor, in exchange for Ms. Voss's guilty plea to both counts and her full cooperation in testifying against others involved in related financial crimes, the people have agreed to recommend a sentence of 5 years for the obstruction charge and 8 years for the accessory charge to be served consecutively for a total of 13 years. This was substantially less than the maximum possible sentence, reflecting both Vivian's age and the prosecution's pragmatic assessment of the value of her cooperation in ongoing investigations into the organized crime connections to Thaddeus Voss's gambling debts, an aspect of the case that extended beyond the murder itself into broader criminal enterprises operating between Detroit and Windsor. Judge Holloway then asked Evans to summarize the factual basis for the charges, which the prosecutor did with characteristic precision. The evidence establishes that Vivian Voss introduced her daughter Serafina to Dante Marlowe at a funeral on September 25, 2022, specifically for the purpose of facilitating a murder-for-hire arrangement, Evans began, referencing surveillance footage and witness statements that had confirmed this critical connection. Text messages recovered during the investigation show that Ms. Voss was fully aware of the planned murder, provided advice on making it appear accidental, and assisted in obtaining the succinylcholine used to paralyze Marcus Devereaux through her hospital board connections. Evans continued methodically through the evidence, including security footage showing Vivian using Serafina's phone to delete incriminating messages while at the police station, the act of obstruction that had transformed her role from knowledge of the conspiracy to active participation in its concealment. When Evans concluded her summary, Judge Holloway turned to Vivian. Ms. Voss, do you agree with the prosecutor's description of your actions? For the first time, Vivian's composure faltered slightly, her gaze dropping briefly before she straightened her shoulders and responded with a clipped, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge pressed further, requiring specific acknowledgement of each component of the charges. You admit that you knowingly introduced your daughter to Mr. Marlowe for the purpose of arranging her husband's murder? Vivian's response came after a barely perceptible hesitation. Yes, Your Honor. And you admit to using your daughter's phone to delete evidence while she was being questioned by police? Again the response, yes, Your Honor. Each admission seemed to diminish Vivian physically, the regal bearing giving way to the reality of a woman confronting the consequences of actions that had contributed to death and destruction within her own family. Judge Holloway then addressed the sentencing agreement, noting that while she was not bound by the prosecution's recommendation, she would give it significant weight given the negotiated nature of the plea. Before proceeding to sentencing, however, I will hear impact statements from those affected by your actions, beginning with Eloise Devereaux. As with Serafina's sentencing, Marcus's mother rose from the gallery with dignity that belied her 72 years, approaching the podium with steady steps that spoke to her determination to represent her murdered son's interests in every proceeding connected to his death. "Your Honor," Eloise began, her voice clear despite the emotion evident in her expression. "Vivian Voss and I have known each other for 15 years, ever since our children married. We sat together at family dinners, celebrated holidays, shared grandparent duties for Kaylin and Sienna." She paused, gathering herself before continuing. "What I cannot comprehend, what I will never understand, is how she could participate in planning my son's murder, not in a moment of passion or confusion, but through calculated actions over weeks." The courtroom remained utterly silent as Eloise continued, addressing Vivian directly, though the defendant kept her gaze fixed forward, avoiding eye contact with her former in-law. "You didn't just lose a son-in-law, Vivian. You sacrificed your relationship with your grandchildren, who now know their grandmother helped orchestrate their father's death. That is a wound for them that no sentence can heal, but accountability matters for their healing process." Dr. Leora Devereaux followed her mother, her testimony focusing on the psychological impact of Vivian's betrayal on Marcus's children. Kaylin and Sienna are struggling not just with the loss of their father and the role their mother played in his death, but with the knowledge that their maternal grandmother, someone they trusted implicitly, was part of this conspiracy, she explained, her professional background in medicine informing her assessment of the children's trauma. Kaylin in particular feels a profound sense of betrayal, learning that while he confided his concerns about his mother's behavior to his grandmother in the days following his father's death, she was actively helping to delete evidence of the crime. This revelation that Vivian had comforted and reassured her grandson while simultaneously working to conceal her daughter's guilt seemed to affect even Judge Holloway, whose expression momentarily reflected the moral weight of such a betrayal before returning to its professional neutrality. When the impact statements concluded, Judge Holloway invited Vivian to address the court before sentencing, if she wished to do so. After conferring briefly with her attorney, Vivian rose, her hands resting lightly on the table before her, as if to steady herself. "Your Honor," she began, her voice carrying the cultured accent of someone educated at exclusive institutions, "I recognize that my actions contributed to a tragic outcome that can never be undone." Unlike her daughter's statement, which had alternated between apology and justification, Vivian's words seemed carefully crafted to acknowledge responsibility while avoiding emotional display. "As a mother, I acted to protect my daughter, when I should have encouraged her to seek legal counsel and face the consequences of her financial actions before the situation escalated to violence." She paused, swallowing visibly before adding, "I cannot undo what has been done, but I accept responsibility for my role and the pain it has caused, particularly to Marcus's children, my grandchildren, whose trust I have irreparably broken." The statement, while technically addressing her culpability, struck many observers as lacking genuine remorse, focusing more on her maternal instinct to protect her daughter than on the moral gravity of participating in a murder conspiracy. Judge Holloway seemed to recognize this as well, her expression thoughtful as Vivian concluded and returned to her seat. After a brief pause to consider, the judge delivered her sentencing decision, beginning with an assessment of Vivian's role that cut through the carefully constructed narrative of maternal protection. "Ms. Voss, this court recognizes that parents often feel a profound instinct to protect their children even in difficult circumstances," Judge Holloway acknowledged. "However, what the evidence in this case demonstrates is not protection, but enablement, not just of the embezzlement that preceded the murder, but of the murder itself through your specific actions in connecting your daughter with Mr. Marlowe and subsequently attempting to destroy evidence." The judge continued, her tone measured but uncompromising. "The text messages between you and your daughter reveal not a parent reluctantly drawn into their child's troubles, but an active participant in planning a murder and ensuring it appeared accidental. She referenced specific exchanges, including Vivian's message advising Serafina on how Marcus's driving habits could be exploited to make his death appear accidental, and her guidance on which police officers at the local precinct might be less thorough in their investigation. These are not the actions of someone passively protecting their child, Judge Holloway observed, but of someone applying their social knowledge and connections to facilitate a homicide. Having addressed the nature of Vivian's involvement, Judge Holloway turned to the sentencing agreement negotiated with the prosecution. This court has considered the recommended sentence of 13 years total imprisonment, 5 years for obstruction of justice, and 8 years for accessory to first-degree murder to be served consecutively. She paused, reviewing her notes before continuing. While this recommendation falls below the maximum possible sentence, the court acknowledges the mitigating factors of your age, your lack of prior criminal history, and, most significantly, your agreement to cooperate fully with ongoing investigations into the organized crime connections revealed during this case. The reference to this cooperation confirmed rumors that had circulated in legal circles that Vivian's plea deal was connected to a broader investigation into gambling operations with ties to both Detroit and Windsor, operations that had created the financial pressure on Thaddeus Voss that ultimately contributed to the chain of events leading to Marcus's murder. After careful consideration of these factors, Judge Holloway announced her decision. This court accepts the terms of the plea agreement and sentences you, Vivian Voss, to a term of 5 years imprisonment for obstruction of justice and 8 years imprisonment for accessory to first-degree murder, to be served consecutively for a total of 13 years. She added specific conditions to the sentence, including that Vivian would be prohibited from any contact with her grandchildren unless specifically requested by them and approved by their legal guardian, Eloise Devereaux. Given your age, this sentence may well represent the remainder of your active life, the judge observed soberly. It is the hope of this court that you will use this time to reflect on the profound moral failures that led to your participation in these events and perhaps eventually find a way to make some meaningful amends to the grandchildren whose lives have been irrevocably altered by your actions. As Vivian was led from the courtroom to begin serving her sentence, the media focus shifted to the final loose end in the case, Dante Marlowe, whose own sentencing had been scheduled for the following week. Unlike Serafina and Vivian, Marlowe had cooperated extensively with investigators from the moment of his arrest, providing crucial information about the conspiracy and testifying against both women at their trials. This cooperation, combined with evidence supporting his claim that he never actually intended to kill Marcus despite taking money under that pretense, had led to a plea agreement that many observers expected would result in a significantly reduced sentence compared to the other participants in the conspiracy. Marlowe's sentencing hearing on August 2, 2023, drew less media attention than the proceedings against Serafina and Vivian, but still filled courtroom 3B with journalists and legal observers interested in the final chapter of the case. At 32, Marlowe presented a striking contrast to his co-conspirators. Where they had maintained composed facades throughout their proceedings, he appeared visibly nervous, frequently consulting with his court-appointed attorney, Michaela Rodriguez, and unable to keep his hands still as he waited for Judge Holloway to enter. His background as a hospital pharmacy technician who had lost his position due to suspected medication theft before becoming entangled with the Voss women had been thoroughly documented during the previous trials, creating a picture of a man whose financial desperation had led him to accept payment for a murder he claims he never intended to commit. Judge Holloway began Marlowe's sentencing by acknowledging his extensive cooperation with investigators. This court recognizes that Mr. Marlowe's decision to cooperate fully with authorities from the time of his arrest provided crucial evidence that might otherwise never have been discovered, she noted, referencing particularly the SIM card backup device that had preserved the text messages Vivian had attempted to delete from Serafina's phone. Additionally, Mr. Marlowe's testimony regarding his actual intentions to take payment from Serafina Vos Devereaux without actually carrying out the murder of Marcus Devereaux is supported by evidence including his purchase ticket to Montreal and apartment rental in Quebec under an assumed name scheduled for 2 days after the murder. Assistant District Attorney Evans confirmed the prosecution's position that while Marlowe was undeniably guilty of conspiracy to commit murder by accepting payment and pretending to participate in the plot, his intent to defraud Serafina rather than actually kill Marcus represented a meaningful distinction for sentencing purposes. The people acknowledged that Mr. Marlowe's extensive cooperation, combined with evidence supporting his claim that he never intended to follow through with the murder itself, justifies the reduced sentence recommendation of 8 years imprisonment with eligibility for parole after 5 years, Evans stated, a stark contrast to Serafina's 35 years to life sentence and Vivian's 13-year term. When given the opportunity to address the court, Marlowe spoke with evident emotion, his practiced confidence giving way to what appeared to be genuine remorse. Your Honor, I know that nothing I say can bring Marcus Devereaux back or undo the pain his family has suffered. He began, his voice unsteady. I never intended for anyone, or to die? I thought I was running a scam on a rich woman who wanted to scare her husband, maybe stage a minor accident for insurance. He paused, visibly struggling to maintain his composure, before continuing. But I provided the drug that killed him. I followed him that night, and when I saw his car go off the road, I texted confirmation instead of calling for help. Those decisions make me responsible for his death, regardless of what I intended or didn't intend. Judge Holloway considered Marlowe's statement, the sentencing recommendation, and the unique circumstances of his role before announcing her decision. Mr. Marlowe, this court acknowledges the distinction between your actions and those of Serafina Vos Devereaux, who directly administered the succinylcholine to her husband with clear intent to cause his death. She paused, her expression grave as she continued, However, by accepting payment under the pretense of committing murder, providing the lethal substance used in the crime, and participating in the conspiracy, even with the claimed intent to defraud rather than kill, you bear significant responsibility for the death that resulted. After weighing these factors, the judge sentenced Marlowe to 10 years imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after 6 years, slightly higher than the prosecution's recommendation, but still reflecting his cooperation and the assessment that his culpability, while substantial, differed meaningfully from that of the primary conspirators. With Marlowe's sentencing, the criminal proceedings related to Marcus Devereaux's murder concluded, though the aftermath continued to unfold for all involved. 1 month after the final sentencing, Eloise Devereaux granted a single interview to the Detroit Free Press, speaking not about the criminal aspects of the case, but about the process of rebuilding life with her grandchildren in the wake of such profound trauma. Kaylin and Sienna are resilient in ways I never imagined children could be, she told the journalist, who met with her in the garden of her Grosse Pointe home, where the children now lived permanently. We talk about Marcus every day, not just about how he died, but about how he lived, the values he stood for, the love he had for them. She described how Leora had relocated her medical practice to be closer to the family, providing both professional support through her connections with child trauma specialists and the personal support of someone who shared the children's loss and understood their complex feelings about their mother. When asked about the children's contact with Serafina, Eloise's expression reflected both sadness and determination. Kaylin has made it clear he doesn't want contact with his mother at this time, a decision the therapists and the court have supported given his age and the severity of the trauma, she explained. Sienna is younger, and her feelings are more conflicted. She has exchanged letters with Serafina, carefully, reviewed by her therapist before delivery, and may eventually want supervised visits if her treatment team believes it would be beneficial for her healing. This measured approach, prioritizing the children's psychological needs over any abstract notion of maintaining mother-child relationships regardless of circumstances, reflected the careful guidance of the mental health professionals who had been working with the family since Serafina's arrest. The financial aspects of the case continued to unfold as well, with Marcus's life insurance policy, now payable to Eloise rather than Serafina due to his prescient beneficiary change, placed in trust for Kaylin and Sienna's education and future needs. Devereaux Aerospace Innovations, the company Marcus had built over 15 years, continued operations under the leadership of his longtime deputy, with a portion of profits directed to the scholarship fund established in his memory at the University of Michigan's College of Engineering. The family home in Detroit's historic Boston Edison neighborhood, which Serafina had been preparing to sell immediately after Marcus's death, was instead sold by Eloise, with proceeds divided between the children's trust and restitution to the aerospace company for the embezzled funds. Perhaps the most positive development emerged 6 months after the sentencings, when Kaylin, now 15, established a peer support group at his high school for students dealing with family trauma and loss. "My dad always said that helping others was the best way to find meaning in difficult experiences," he told the school newspaper in a brief interview about the initiative. "I can't change what happened to him, but I can use what I've learned about grief and betrayal to help other kids who feel alone in their pain." This remarkable response to tragedy, turning personal suffering toward compassion for others, reflected the values Marcus had instilled in his son during their too brief time together, values that would continue to shape Kaylin's life long after the media attention to the case had faded and the criminal proceedings had concluded. On the first anniversary of Marcus's death, October 5, 2023, the Devereaux family, Eloise, Lyra, Kaylin, and Sienna, held a private memorial service at their home rather than visiting the crash site where he had died. "We're focusing on celebrating his life rather than revisiting the manner of his death," Lyra explained to the small circle of close friends who joined them. The family shared stories of Marcus's humor, his passion for engineering challenges, his patience teaching Kaylin to build model rockets, and his tradition of Sunday morning pancakes with Sienna. These memories, preserved and honored through such rituals of remembrance, ensured that Marcus Devereaux would be remembered not primarily as a victim in a sensational murder case, but as the father, son, brother, and innovator whose life had touched so many before its premature end, on that dark road outside Detroit in 2022. As Judge Adrienne Holloway had observed in her final comments at Serafina's sentencing, true justice cannot simply be measured in years of incarceration, for no sentence can restore Marcus Devereaux to his children or heal the wounds this crime has created. Yet, through the resilience of those children, the dedication of their grandmother and aunt, the accountability established through the legal proceedings, and the continuing legacy of Marcus's work and values, a different kind of justice emerged, not the restoration of what was lost, which remained impossible, but the creation of something meaningful from that loss. In this way, the story of Marcus Devereaux and his family transcended the sensational headlines about the woman who hired a hitman to kill her husband, becoming instead a testament to the enduring power of integrity, love, and resilience in the face of betrayal and loss.